test the audio. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing. Is it coming through? Okay, that makes sense. Good evening, and welcome to the... You can go ahead and cross over. Oh, the audio engineer, my sister. Good evening. Welcome to the 8th annual reading of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. Better open up the fireplace. There we go. Get the roaring fire going. Even though it is 60 degrees out, it's all for the aesthetic. This year, for the reading chose to... Will you just take him upstairs? Okay. Or actually, he'll be fine. He'll be fine. Sorry. This is a family-friendly stream, so that means that you may hear dogs barking or cats meowing. It's just part of it. So this year, the stream is going to support Rare Breed Youth Center. If you are not aware, Rare Breed is an organization in town that works with providing the basic needs and comforts for teens who are experiencing homelessness or potentially on the verge of homelessness. I know through my days as a youth pastor and just other opportunities to volunteer with Rare Breed, they are incredible at what they do. Wonderful organization, definitely out there doing the hard work that a lot of us either don't get a chance to do or even don't even think about that goes on. And I believe that in the true spirit of A Christmas Carol, they do a great job of just being there to provide the needs for those teens. Throughout this reading, I ask that you go to their website. It should be in the event description below, and read up about them, give them some support, maybe even sign up to volunteer. And then during the intermissions, there will be 3 intermissions. There will be a QR code that will pop up that you can scan to be able to give some support to them and really help those in need. Because, like it says in the book, need is so keenly felt, especially this time of the rolling year. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So for the 8th time, Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. Stave 1, Marley's Ghost. Marley was dead to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed it, and Scrooge's name was good upon change for anything he put his hand to. Old Marley was as dead as a doornail. Mind, I don't mean to say that I know, of my knowledge, what there is particularly dead about a doornail. I might have been inclined myself to regard a coffin nail as the deadest piece of ironmongery in the trade. But the wisdom of our ancestors is in the simile, and my unhallowed hand shall not disturb it, or the country's done for. You will therefore permit me to repeat emphatically that Marley was as dead as a doornail. Scrooge knew he was dead. Of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and he were partners for I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his sole executor, his sole administrator, his sole assign, his sole registrar legatee, his sole friend, and his sole mourner. And even Scrooge was not so dreadfully cut up by the sad event, but that he, an excellent man of business, on the very day of the funeral, and seldomness it with undoubtable bargaining. The mention of Marley's funeral brings me back to the point that I started from. There is no doubt that Marley was dead. This must be distinctly understood, or nothing good can come of the story that I am going to relate. If we are not perfectly convinced that Hamlet's father died before the play began, then there would be nothing more remarkable in the taking a stroll at night in an easterly wind upon his own ramparts than there would be in any other middle-aged gentleman rashly turning after dark in a breezy spot, say St. Paul's churchyard, for instance, literally to astonish his son's weak mind. Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name. There it stood, years afterwards, above the warehouse door, Scrooge and Marley. The firm was known as Scrooge and Marley. Sometimes people knew the business called Scrooge, and sometimes Marley, but he answered to both names. It was all the same to him. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, Scrooge, a squeezing, wretched, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. Hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck generous fire, secret and self-contained and solitary as an oyster. The cold within him froze his old features, nipped his pointed nose, shriveled his cheek, stiffened his gait, made his eyes red, his thin lips blue, and spoke out shrewdly in his grating voice. A frosty rime on his head and on his eyebrows and his wiry chin. He carried his own low temperature always about him. He iced his office in the dog days and didn't thaw at 1 degree at Christmas. External heat and cold had little influence on Scrooge. No warmth could warm, nor wintry wind chill him. No wind that blew was bitterer than he. No falling snow was more intent upon its purpose. No pelting rain less open to entry. Foul weather didn't know where to have him. The heaviest rain and snow and hail and sleet could boast of the advantage over him in only one respect. They often came down handsomely, and Scrooge never did. Nobody ever stopped him in the street to say with gladsome looks, "My dear Scrooge, how are you? Will you come to see me?" No beggars implore him to bestow a trifle. No children ask him what it was o'clock. No man or woman ever once in his life inquired the way to which or such place of Scrooge. Even the blind man's dog appeared to know him, and they saw him coming on, and would tug their owners into doorways and up courts, and then would wag their tails as though they say, "No eye at all is better than an evil eye, dark master." But what did Scrooge care? It was the very thing he liked, to edge his way along the crowded paths of life, warning all human sympathy to keep its distance, was what the knowing ones call nuts to Scrooge. Once upon a time, of all the good days in the year, on Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. It was cold, bleak, biting weather, foggy withal, and he could hear the people in the court outside go wheezing up and down, beating their hands upon their breast and stamping their feet upon the pavement stones to warm them. The city clocks had only just gone 3, but it was quite dark already. It had not been light all day, and candles were flaring in the windows of the neighboring offices, like ruddy smears upon the palpable brown air. The fog came pouring in at every chink and keyhole, and was so dense without that although the court was of the narrowest, the houses opposite were phantoms. To see the dingy cloud come drooping down, obscuring everything, one might have thought that nature lived hard by and was brewing on a large scale. The door of Scrooge's counting house was open that he might keep his eye upon his clerk, who in a dismal little cell beyond, a sort of tank, was copying letters. Scrooge had a very small fire, but the clerk's fire was so very much smaller that it looked like one coal. But he couldn't replenish it, for Scrooge kept the coal box in his own room, so surely as the clerk came in with the shovel, the master predicted that it would be necessary for them to part. Wherefore the clerk put on his white comforter and tried to warm himself with a candle, in which effort, not being a man of strong imagination, he failed. "A Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you!" cried a cheerful voice. It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, who came upon him so quickly that this was the first intimidation he had of his approach. "Bah!" said Scrooge. "Humbug!" He had so heated himself with rapid walking in the fog and frost, this nephew of Scrooge's, that he was all in a glow. His face was ruddy and handsome, his eyes sparkled, and his breath smoked again. "Christmas a humbug, Uncle," said Scrooge's nephew. "You don't mean that, I'm sure." "I do," said Scrooge. "Merry Christmas. What right have you to be merry? What reason have you to be merry? You're poor enough." "Come, then," returned the nephew gaily. "What right have you to be dismal? What right have you to be morose? You're rich enough." Scrooge kept... Scrooge, having no better answer on the spur of the moment, said "Bah!" again, and followed it up with "Humbug." "Don't be cross, Uncle," said the nephew. "What else can I be?" returned the uncle, "when I live in such a world of fools as this? Merry Christmas. Out upon Merry Christmas. What's Christmas time to you but a time for paying bills without money, a time for finding yourself a year older and not an hour richer, a time for balancing your books and having every item in them, though through a round dozen of months, presented dead against you. If I could work my will," said Scrooge indignantly, "every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled in his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart, he should." "Uncle," pleaded the nephew. "Nephew," returned the uncle sternly, "keep Christmas in your own way, and let me keep it in mine." "Keep it?" repeated Scrooge's nephew. "But you don't keep it." "Let me leave it alone, then," said Scrooge. "Much good it do you, much good it has ever done you." "There are many things from which I might have derived good, by which I have not profited, I dare say," returned the nephew. "Christmas among the rest. But I am sure I have always thought of Christmas time, when it has come around, apart from the veneration due to its sacred name and origin, if anything belonging to it can be apart from that, as a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time. The only time I know of in the long calendar year when men and women seem by one consent to open their shut-up hearts freely and to think of people below them as if they really were fellow passengers to the grave, and not another race of creature bound on other journeys. And therefore, Uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe that it has done me good, and will do me good, and I say God bless it." The clerk in the tank involuntarily applauded, becoming immediately sensible of the impropriety. He poked the fire and extinguished the last frail spark forever. "Let me hear another sound out of you," said Scrooge, "and you'll keep your Christmas by losing your situation." "You're quite a powerful speaker," he said, turning to his nephew. "I wonder you don't go into Parliament." "Don't be angry, Uncle. Come, dine with us tomorrow." Scrooge said that he would see him. Yes, indeed he did. He went the whole length of the expression and said he would see him in that extremity first. "But why?" cried Scrooge's nephew. "Why?" "Why did you get married?" said Scrooge. "Because I fell in love." "Because you fell in love," growled Scrooge, as if this were the only thing in the world more ridiculous than a Merry Christmas. "Good afternoon." "Nay, Uncle, but you never came to see me before that happened. Why give it a reason for not coming now?" "Good afternoon," said Scrooge. "I want nothing from you. I ask nothing of you. Why can't we be friends?" "Good afternoon," said Scrooge. "I am sorry, with all my heart, to find you so resolute. We have never had any quarrel to which I have been a party, but I made the trial and homage to Christmas, and I'll keep my Christmas humor to the last. So, a Merry Christmas, Uncle." "Good afternoon," said Scrooge. "And a Happy New Year." "Good afternoon," said Scrooge. His nephew left the room without an angry word, notwithstanding. He stopped at the outer door to bestow the greetings of the season upon the clerk, who, as cold as he was warmer than Scrooge, for he returned them cordially. "There's another fellow," muttered Scrooge, who overheard him. "My clerk, with 15 shillings a week and a wife and family, talking about a Merry Christmas. I'll retire to Bedlam." This lunatic, in letting Scrooge's nephew out, had let 2 other people in. They were portly gentlemen, pleasant to behold, and now stood, with their hats off, in Scrooge's office. They had books and papers in their hands, and bowed to him. "Scrooge and Marley's, I believe," said one gentleman, referring to his list. "Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley?" "Mr. Marley has been dead these 7 years," replied Scrooge. "He died 7 years ago this very night." "We have no doubt that his liberality is well represented by a surviving partner," said the gentleman, presenting his credentials. It certainly was, for they had been 2 kindred spirits. At the ominous word liberality, Scrooge frowned and shook his head and handed the credentials back. "At this festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge," said the gentleman, taking up a pen, "it is more than usually desirable that we should make some slight provision for the poor and destitute, who suffer greatly at the present time. Many thousands are in want of common necessities, and hundreds of thousands are in want of common comforts, sir." "Are there no prisons?" asked Scrooge. "Plenty of prisons," said the gentleman, laying down the pen again. "And the Union workhouses?" demanded Scrooge. "Are they still in operation?" "They are still," returned the gentleman, "and I wish I could say that they were not. The treadmill and the poor law are in full vigor, then?" said Scrooge. "Both very busy, sir." "Oh, I was afraid, from what you had said at first, that something had occurred to stop them in their useful course," said Scrooge. "I'm very glad to hear it." Under the impression that they scarcely furnish Christmas cheer of mind or body to the multitude, replied the gentleman, "a few of us are endeavoring to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and some drink and means of warmth. We choose this time because it is a time of all others when want is keenly felt and abundance rejoices. What shall I put you down for?" "Nothing," replied Scrooge. "You wish to remain anonymous?" "I wish to be left alone," said Scrooge. "Since you ask me what I wish, gentlemen, this is my answer. I don't make merry myself at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry. I help to support the establishments I've mentioned. They cost enough, and those who are badly off must go there. Many can't go there. Many would rather die." "If they'd rather die," said Scrooge, "then they'd better do it and decrease the surplus population. Besides, excuse me, I don't know that." "But you might know it," observed the gentleman. "It's none of my business," returned Scrooge. "It's enough for man to understand his own business and not interfere with the other people's. Mine occupies me constantly. Good afternoon, gentlemen." Seeing clearly that it would be useless to pursue their point, the gentlemen withdrew. Scrooge resumed his labors with an improved opinion of himself and in more factitious temper than was usual of him. Meanwhile, the fog and darkness thickened so that people ran about with flaring lamps, proffering their services to go before in the carriages and conduct them on their way. The ancient tower of the church, whose gruff old bell was always peeping slyly down at Scrooge out of the Gothic window in the wall, became invisible, and struck the hour and a quarters in the clouds with tremendous vibrations afterwards, as if its teeth were chattering in its frozen head up there. The cold became intense. In the main street, at the corner of the court, some laborers were repairing the gas pipes and had lighted a great fire in the brazier, around which a party of ragged men and boys were gathered, warming their hands and winking their eyes before the blaze in rapture. The water plug being left in solitude, its overflowings sully congealed and turned into misanthropic ice. The brightness of the shops, where holly, sprigs, and berries crackled in the lamp heat of the windows, made pale faces ruddy as they passed. Poulterers and grocer trades became a splendid joke. a glorious pageant with which it is next to impossible to believe that there are such dull principles as bargain and sale had anything to do with. The Lord Mayor, in the stronghold of the awful mansion house, gave orders to his 50 cooks and butlers to keep Christmas as the Lord Mayor's household should, and even the tailor, who had fined 5 shillings on the previous Monday for being drunk and bloodthirsty in the streets, stirred up tomorrow's pudding in his garret, while his lean wife and baby sailed out to buy the beef. Foggier yet and colder, piercer, searching, biting cold. It was the good St. Dustin had been nipped the evil spirit's nose with a touch of such weather as that, instead of using his familiar weapons, that indeed he would have roared to lusty purpose. The owner of one scant young nose, gnawed and mumbled by the hungry, cold, and bones are gnawed by dogs, stooped down at Scrooge's keyhole to regale him with a Christmas carol. But at the first sound of "God bless you, merry gentlemen, may nothing you dismay," Scrooge seized the ruler with such energy of action that the singer fled in terror, leaving the keyhole to the fog and even more congealed frost. At length the hour of shutting up the counting-house had arrived. With an ill will, Scrooge dismounted from his stool and tactfully admitted his face to the expectant clerk in the tank, who instantly snuffed out the candle and put on his hat. This is probably going to be a theme tonight. "You'll want all day, I suppose," said Scrooge. "If quite convenient, sir." "It's not convenient," said Scrooge, "and it's not fair. If I was to stop half a crown for it, you'd think yourself ill-used, I be bound." The clerk smiled faintly. "And yet," said Scrooge, "you think me not ill-used when I pay a day's wages for no work." The clerk observed that it was only once a year. "A poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December," said Scrooge, buttoning his greatcoat to his chin. But I suppose you must have the whole day. Be here all the earlier the next morning." The clerk promised that he would, and Scrooge walked out with a growl. The office was closed in a twinkling, and the clerk, with the long ends of his white comforter dangling below his waist, for he boasted no great waistcoat, went down a slide on Cornhill and at the end of Lane of Boys 20 times in honor of it being Christmas Eve, and then ran home to Camden Town as hard as he could pelt to play at blind man's bluff. Scrooge took his melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern, and having read all the newspapers and beguiled the rest of the evening with his banker's book, went home to bed. He lived in chambers that had once belonged to his deceased partners. They were a gloomy suit of rooms in a lowering pile of building up a yard where it had so little business to be that one could scarcely help fancying that it had run there when it was just a young house playing at hide-and-seek with the other houses, and had forgotten its way out again. It was old enough now, and dreary enough, for no one lived in it but Scrooge, the other rooms being all let out as offices. The yard was so dark that even Scrooge, who knew its every stone, was fain to grope with his hands. The fog and frost hung so about the black old gateway of the house that it seemed as if the genius of the weather sat in mournful meditation on the threshold. Now, it is a fact that there was nothing at all particularly about the knocker of the door, except that it was very large. It is also a fact that Scrooge had seen it, night and morning, during his whole residence in the place. Also that Scrooge had as little of what is called fancy about him as any man in the city of London, even including, which is a bold word, the corporation, the alderman, and the livery. Let it also be borne in mind that Scrooge had not bestowed one thought on Marley since his meditation, or since his last mention of his 7 years dead partner that afternoon. And let any man explain to me, if he can, how it happened that Scrooge, having his key in the lock of the door, saw in the knocker without its ongoing any intermediate process of change, not a knocker, but Marley's face. Marley's face. It was not an impenetrable shadow as the other objects in the yard were, but had a dismal light about it, like a bad lobster in a dark cellar. It was not angry or ferocious, but looked at Scrooge as Marley used to look, with ghostly spectacles turned up on its ghostly forehead. The hair was curiously stirred as if by breath or hot air, and though his eyes were wide, they were perfectly motionless. That and its livid color made it horrible, but its horror seemed to be in spite of its face and beyond its control, rather than a part of its own expression. As Scrooge looked fixedly at the phenomenon, it was a knocker again. To say that he had not startled, or that his blood was not conscious of a terrible sensation to which it had been a stranger from infancy, would be untrue. But he put his hand upon the key he had relinquished, turned it sternly, walked in, and lit a candle. He did pause, with a moment's irresolution, before he shut the door, and he did look consciously behind it at first, as if he half expected to be terrified with the sight of Marley's pigtails sticking out into the hall. But there was nothing on the back of the door, except the screws and nuts that held the knocker on, so he said, "Foo-foo," and closed it with a bang. The sound resounded throughout the house, like thunder. Every room above and every cask in the wine merchant's cellars below appeared to have a separate peal of echoes of its own. Scrooge was not a man to be frightened by echoes. He fastened the door and walked across the hall and up the stairs, slowly too, trimming the candle as he went. You may talk vaguely about driving a coach and six up a good old flight of stairs, or through a bad young Act of Parliament. But I mean to say, you could have got a hearse up that staircase, and taken it broadwise, with the splinter bar towards the hall, or towards the wall, and the door with the best balustrades, and done it easy. There was plenty of width for that, and room to spare, which it perhaps is the reason why Scrooge thought he saw a locomotive hearse going on before him in the gloom. Half a dozen gas lamps out of the street wouldn't have lighted the entry too well, so you may suppose that it was pretty dark with Scrooge's dip. Up Scrooge went, not caring a buttoness for that. Darkness was cheap, and Scrooge liked it. But before he shut the heavy door, he walked through the rooms to see that it was all right. He had collected just enough recollection of the face to desire to do that. Sitting room, bedroom, lumber room, all as they should be. Nobody under the table, nobody under the sofa. A small fire in a grate, spoon and basin ready, and a little saucepan of gruel. Scrooge had a cold in his head. Upon the hob. Nobody under the bed. Nobody in the closet. Nobody in his dressing gown, which was hanging up in a suspicious attitude against the wall. Lumber room as usual. Old fire guard, old shoes, 2 fish baskets, and washing stand on 3 legs and a poker. Quite satisfied, he closed his door and locked himself in. Double locked himself in, which was not his custom. Thus secured against his surprise, he took off his cravat, put on his dressing gown and slippers, and his nightcap, and sat down before the fire to take his gruel. It was a very low fire indeed, nothing on such a bitter night. He was obliged to sit close to it and brood over it, before he could extract the last sensation of warmth from it, such a handful of fuel. The fireplace was an old one, built by some Dutch merchant long ago, and paved all around with quaint Dutch tiles, designed to illustrate the scriptures. There were Cains and Abels, Pharaoh's daughters, queens of Sheba, angelic messengers descending through the air on cloud-like feather beds, Abraham's, Belshazzar's, apostles putting off to sea in butter boats, hundreds of figures to attract his thoughts, and yet the face of Marley, 7 years dead, came like an ancient prophet's rod, and swelled up on the whole. If each smooth tile had been a blank face, and the power to shape some pictures on a surface from a disjointed fragments of his thoughts, there would have been a copy of old Marley's head on every one of them. Humbug, said Scrooge, and walked across the room. After several turns, he sat down again. He threw his head back in the chair. His glance happened to rest upon a bell, and upon a bell, a disused bell, that hung in the room, and communicated for some purpose now forgotten with the chamber in the highest story of the building. It was with great astonishment, and with a strange, inexplicable dread, that he looked and he saw this bell begin to swing. It swung so softly in the onset that it scarcely made a sound, but it soon rang out loud, and so did every bell in the house. This might have lasted half a minute or a minute, but it seemed an hour. The bells ceased as they begun together. Together. They were succeeded by a clinking noise, deep down below, as if some person were dragging a heavy chain over the casks in the wine merchant's cellar. Scrooge then remembered to have heard the ghosts of haunted houses were described as dragging chains. The cellar door flew open with a booming sound, and then he heard the noise much louder on the floors below. Then coming up the stairs, then coming straight towards his door. "It's a humbug still," said Scrooge. "I won't believe it." His color changed, though. Then, without a pause, it came through the heavy door and passed into the room before his eyes. Upon his coming in, the dying flame leapt up and cried, "I know him! It's Marley's ghost!" and fell again. The same face, the very same. Marley in his pigtails, usual waistcoat, tights, and boots, the tassels on the latter bristling like his pigtails, and his coat skirts, and the hair upon his head. The chain he drew was clasped around his middle. It was long and wound about him like a tail, and it was made, for Scrooge observed it closely, of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, and heavy purses wrought in steel. His body was transparent, so that Scrooge, observing him and looked through his waistcoat, could see the two buttons on his coat behind. Scrooge had often heard it said that Marley had no bowels, but he had never believed it until now. No, nor did he believe it even now. Though he looked the phantom through and through, and saw it standing before him, though he felt the chilling influence of his death cold eyes, and marked the very texture of the folded handkerchief bound about his head and chin, which wrapper he had not observed before, he was still incredulous and fought against his senses. "How now?" said Scrooge, caustic and cold as ever. "What do you want with me?" "Much," said Marley's voice, no doubt about it. "Who are you?" "Ask me who I was." "Who were you, then?" said Scrooge, raising his voice. "You're familiar, for a shade." He was going to say "to a shade," but substituted this as more appropriate. "In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley." Can you sit down?" asked Scrooge, looking doubtfully at him. "I can." "Then do it." Scrooge asked the question, but he didn't know whether the ghost, so transparent, might find himself in a condition to take a chair, and felt that in the event of it being impossible, it might involve the necessity of an embarrassing explanation. But the ghost sat down on the opposite side of the fireplace, as he were quite used to it. "You don't believe in me," observed the ghost. "I don't," said Scrooge. "What evidence would you have of reality beyond that of your senses?" "I don't know," said Scrooge. "Why do you doubt your senses?" "Because," said Scrooge, "a little thing affects them. A slight disorder of the stomach makes them cheat. You may be a undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of underdone potato. There's more of gravy than of grave of you, whatever you are." Scrooge was not much in the habit of cracking jokes, nor did he feel, in his heart, by any means waggish them. The truth is that he tried to be smart, as a means of distracting his own attention and keeping down his terror, for the spectre's voice disturbed the very marrow in his bones. To sit staring at him, fixed gaze and silence for a moment, he would play, Scrooge felt, the very deuce with him. There was something very awful in him, awful, too, in the specter being provided with an infernal atmosphere of his own. Scrooge could not feel it himself, but this was very clearly the case, for though the ghost sat perfectly motionless, his hair and skirts and tassels were still agitated by the hot vapor from the oven. "You see this toothpick?" said Scrooge, returning quietly to the charge, for the reason just assigned, and wishing, though it were only for a second, to divert the vision's stony gaze from himself. "I do," replied the ghost. "But you're not looking at it," said Scrooge. "But I see it, notwithstanding." "Well," returned Scrooge, "I have but to swallow this, and for the rest of my days persecuted by a legion of goblins of my own creation. Humbug, I tell you, humbug!" At this, the spirit raised a frightful cry and shook its chains with a dismal and appalling noise, and that Scrooge held on tight to his chair to save himself from falling in a swoon. But how much greater was this horror, when the phantom, taking off the bandage around his head, as it were too warm to wear it indoors, its lower jaw dropped upon its breast. Scrooge fell upon his knees and clasped his hands before its face. "Mercy," said Scrooge. "Dreadful apparition, what do you want from me?" "Man of worldly mind," replied the ghost, "do you believe in me or not?" "I do," said Scrooge. I must. But why do spirits walk the earth, and why to me?" "It is required of every man," the ghost returned, "that the spirit within him should walk around among his fellow men and travel far and wide. And if that spirit goes not forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death. It is doomed to wander through this world, oh woe is me, and witness what it can no longer share, but might have shared on earth, and turned to happiness." Again, the specter raised a cry, and took his chain, and wrung its shadowy hands. "You are fettered," said Scrooge, trembling. "Tell me why." "I wear the chains that I forged in life," replied the ghost. "I made it link by link and yard by yard. I girded on it of my own free will, and of my own free will I wore it. Its pattern strange to you? Is its pattern strange to you?" Scrooge trembled more and more. "Or would you know," pursued the ghost, "that the weight and length of the strong coil you wear yourself? It was full as heavy and as long as this 7 Christmas Eves ago. You have labored on it since. It is a ponderous chain." Scrooge glanced about him on the floor, and half expected to find himself surrounded by some 50 or 60 fathoms of iron cable. But he could do nothing. "Jacob," he said imploringly, "old Jacob Marley, tell me more. Speak comfort to me, Jacob." "I have none to give," the ghost replied. "It comes from other regions, Ebenezer Scrooge, and is conveyed by other ministers to other kinds of men. Nor can I tell you what I would. For a very little more, it is all permitted to me. I may not rest. I may not stay. I may not linger anywhere. My spirit never walked beyond our counting house, mark me. In life, my spirit never roved beyond the narrow limits of our money-changing hole, and weary journeys lie before me." It was a habit with Scrooge, whenever he became thoughtful, to put his hands in his breeches pockets. Pondering on what the ghost had said, he did so now, but without lifting his eyes or getting off his knees. "You have been very slow about it, Jacob," Scrooge observed in a businesslike manner, though with humility and deference. "Slow?" the ghost replied. 7 years dead?" mused Scrooge. "And traveling all this time?" "The whole time," said the ghost. "No rest, no peace, incessant torture of remorse." "You travel fast?" said Scrooge. "On the wings of the wind," replied the ghost. "You might have gotten over a great quantity of ground in 7 years," said Scrooge. The ghost, on hearing this, set up another cry, and clinked his chain so hideously in the dead silence of the night that the ward would have been justified in indicting him for a nuisance. "O captive, bound and double-ironed," cried the phantom, not to know that ages of incessant labor by immortal creatures, for this earth must pass into eternity before the good of which is so susceptible is all developed, not to know that any Christmas spirit working kindly in its little sphere, whatever it may be, will forever its mortal find its moral life too short for its vast means of usefulness, not to know that no space of regret can make amends for one life's opportunities misused. Yet such was I, oh, such was I. But you were always a good man of business, Jacob, faltered Scrooge, who now began to apply this to himself. Business? Cried the ghost, wringing his hands again. Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business. It held up its claim at arm's length, as if it were the cause of all of its unavailing grief, and flung it upon the ground again. At this time of the rolling year, the spectre said, I suffer most. Why did I walk through the crowds of fellow beings, with my eyes turned up, and never raise them to that blessed star which led the wise men to a poor abode? Were there no poor homes to which its light could have conducted me? Scrooge was very much dismayed to hear the spectre going on at this rate, and began to quake exceedingly. Hear me, cried the ghost. My time is nearly gone. I will, said Scrooge, but don't be hard on me. Don't be flowery, Jacob, pray. How it is that I have appeared before you in a shape that you can see, I may not tell. I have sat invisible beside you many and many a day. It was not an agreeable idea, Scrooge shivered, and wiping the perspiration from his brow. There is no light part of my penance, pursued the ghost. I am here tonight to warn you that you have a chance and a hope of escaping my fate, as a hope and a chance of my procuring Ebenezer. You are always a good friend to me, Jacob, said Scrooge. Thank you. You will be haunted, resumed the ghost, by 3 spirits. Scrooge's countenance fell, almost as low as the ghost had done. Is that the chance and favor you mentioned, Jacob? He demanded in a faltering voice. It is. I think I'd rather not, said Scrooge. Without their visit, said the ghost, you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first tomorrow when the bell tolls 1. Couldn't I take 'em all at once and have it over, Jacob? Hinted Scrooge. Expect the second on the next night at the same hour. The third upon the next night at the same hour. Look to see me no more, and look for that your own sake you may remember what has passed between us. When it had said these words, the spectre took its wrapping from the table and bound it round its head, as before. Scrooge knew this by the smart sound of its teeth, made when its jaws were brought together by the bandage. He ventured to raise his eyes again, and found his supernatural visitor confronting him in an erect attitude, with its chains wound about its arm. The apparition walked backwards from him, and at every step it took, the window raised itself a little, so that when the spectre reached it, it was wide open. It beckoned Scrooge to approach, which he did. When they were within 2 paces of each other, Marley's ghost held up his hand, warning him to come no nearer. Scrooge stopped, not so much in obedience as in surprise or fear. For on the raising of the hand, he became sensible of confused noises in the air, incoherent sounds of lamentation and regret, wailings, inexpressible sorrow and self-accusatory. The spectre, after listening for a moment, joined in the mournful dirge and floated out upon the bleak, dark night. Scrooge followed to the window. Desperate in his curiosity, he looked out. The air was filled with phantoms, wandering hither and thither in restless haste, and moaning as they went. Every one of them wore chains like Marley's ghost. Some few, they might be guilty governments, were linked together. None were free. Many had been personally known to Scrooge in their lives. Uh, he had uh, uh, he had been quite familiar with one old ghost in a white waistcoat with a monstrous iron safe attached to its ankle. He cried piteously at being unable to assist a wretched woman with an infant who he saw below upon a doorstep. The misery with them all was, clearly, that they sought to interfere for good in human affairs and had lost the power forever. Whether those creatures faded into mist or mist enshrouded them, he could not tell. But they and their spirit voices faded together, and the night became as it had been uh, when he walked home. Scrooge closed the window and examined the door by which the ghost had entered. It was double locked, as he had locked it with his own hands, and the bolts were undisturbed. He tried to say "humbug," but stopped at the first syllable, and being, from the emotion he had overgone, or the fatigues of the day, or his glimpse of the invisible world, or the dull conversation of the ghost, or the lateness of the hour, much in need of repose, went straight to bed without undressing, and fell asleep upon the instant. We will now pause for a brief intermission and tea break before we begin the second stave. Be right back. All right, we are back again. Thank you for joining me. If you are here, if you would share the stream on whatever social media platform you use, uh, the more we can get people to tune in. Hopefully, the more money Rare Breed can get. Again, Rare Breed is an organization in Springfield that is an outreach for teens. They're either currently facing homelessness or on the verge of facing it. I've gotten the opportunity to volunteer with them several times, and it is wonderful what they are doing. Very much in the spirit of A Christmas Carol. So that is who we are asking you to donate. Again, if you go to, if you look down below at the event or the live stream description, the link to their website is there. You can donate from there, or if you want to wait until the next intermission, there's a QR code that will come up that will allow, will take you to that website as well to be able to donate. But thank you in advance for your donation, helping them out. I know that your donation will go towards helping those in need. But I got the fire stoked a little more. I've got some tea with some honey and a Christmas goose mug. So we are ready for the next one. We'll give you a heads up. My sound technician went to go get some dinner. So she will probably come in the middle of this. The poodle that is in the room will probably go crazy. If that's the case, we'll deal with that when it happens. So just again, this is a family-friendly live stream, so the family is included. You may see a cat run by here in a bit as well, but you know, you just gotta roll with it, right? All right, let's see what old Scrooge is up to now. Stave 2, the first of the three spirits. When Scrooge awoke, it was dark. It was so dark that he looked out his bed and could scarcely distinguish the transparent window from the opaque walls of his chamber. He was endeavored to pierce the darkness in his ferret eyes when the chimes of a neighboring church struck the 4 quarters. So he listened for the hour. Then, to his great astonishment, the heavy bell rang. The heavy bell went on from 6 to 7, and from 7 to 8, and regularly up to 12. Then stopped. 12. It was past 2 when he went to bed. The clock was wrong. An icicle must have gone into the works. 12. He touched the spring of his repeater to correct this preposterous clock. Its rapid little pulse beat 12, and then stopped. Why, it isn't possible, said Scrooge, that I could have slept through a whole day and far into another night. It isn't possible that anything has happened to the sun, and this is 12 at noon? The idea being an alarming one, he scrambled out of bed and groped his way to the window. He was obliged to rub the frost off with the sleeve of his dressing gown before he could see anything, and could see very little then. All he could make out was that it was still very foggy and extremely cold, and that there was no noise of people running to and fro and making a great stir, as there unquestionably would have been had there been a night, had been if night had beaten off bright day and taken possession of the world. This was a great relief, because 60 days after sought pay to me my order, and so forth, would have become a mere United States security if there were no days to count by. Scrooge went to bed again, and thought it over and over, and could make nothing of it. The more he thought, the more perplexed he was, and the more he endeavored not to think, the more he thought. Marley's ghost bothered him exceedingly. Every time he resolved within himself, after mature inquiry, that it was all a dream, his mind flew back again, like a strong spring released to its first position, and presented the same problem to be worked all through. Was it a dream or not? Scrooge lay in his state until the chimes had gone 3 quarters more. Then he remembered all of a sudden that the ghost had warned him of a visitation when the bell tolled 1. He resolved to lie awake until the hour was past, and considering that he could no more go to sleep than he could go to heaven, this was perhaps the wisest resolution to his power. The quarter was so long that he was more than once convinced that he had sunk into a doze unconsciously and missed the clock. At length, it broke upon his listening ear. Give me one moment while I fix the fire. Sorry about that. That should get it going. Where were we? Oh, yes. Ding dong. A quarter past, said Scrooge, counting. Ding dong. Half past, said Scrooge. Ding dong. A quarter to it, said Scrooge. Ding dong. The hour itself, said Scrooge, triumphantly, and nothing else. He spoke before the hour bell sounded, which it did now with a deep, dull, hollow, melancholy 1. The light flashed up in the room upon the instant, and the curtains of his bed were drawn. The curtains of his bed were drawn aside, I tell you, by hand. Not the curtains of his feet, nor the curtains of his back, curtains at his back, but those to which his face was addressed. The curtains of his bed were drawn aside, and Scrooge started up into a half-recumbent attitude, found himself face to face with the unearthly visitor who drew them, as close to it as I am to you, and am standing in the spirit at your elbow. It was a strange figure, like a child, yet not so like a child, as like an old man viewed through some supernatural medium, which gave him the appearance of having receded from the view, and being diminished to a child's proportion. Its hair, which hung about its neck and down its back, as white as if with age, and yet its face had not a wrinkle on it, and the nearest bloom was on the skin, and the tenderest bloom was on its skin. The arms were very long and muscular, and the hands were the same, as if its hold were of common strength. Its legs and feet, most delicately formed, were like those of its upper members, bare. It wore a tunic of the purest white, and round its waist was bound a lustrous belt, and sheen of which was beautiful. It held a fresh branch of green holly in its hand, and in a singular contradiction of that white emblem, had its dress trimmed with the summer flowers. But the strangest thing about it was that from its crown of its head there sprung a bright, clear jet of light, by which all of this was visible, and which was doubtless of the occasion of its using, and in its duller moments a great extinguisher for a cap, by which it now held under its arm. Even this, though, when Scrooge looked at it with increasing steadiness, was not its strangest quality. For as its belt sparkled and glittered now in one part and now in another, and what light what was light one instant at another time was dark, so that the figure itself fluctuated in its distinctiveness, uh, being now a thing with one arm, now with one leg, now with 20 legs, now with a pair of legs, without a head, now without a head without a body, of which dissolving parts, no outline would be visible, in which dense gloom wherein they melted away, and in the very wonder of this, it would be itself again, distinct and clear as ever. Are you the spirit, sir, whose coming was foretold to me? Said Scrooge. I am. The voice was soft and gentle, singularly low, and if instead of being so close beside him, it were at a distance. Who and what are you? Scrooge demanded. I am the ghost of Christmas past. Long past? Inquired Scrooge, observant of the dwarfish statue. No, your past. Perhaps Scrooge could have told anybody why, if anybody could have asked him. But he had a special desire to see the spirit in his cap, and begged him to be covered. What? Explained the ghost. Would you so soon put out with worldly hands the light that I give? Is it not enough that you are one of those whose passions made this cap, and forced me throughout whole trains of years to wear it low upon my brow? Scrooge reservedly disclaimed all intention to offend, or any knowledge of having wilfully bonneted the spirit at any point in his life. He then made bold to inquire what business brought him there. Your welfare, said the ghost. Scrooge expressed himself much obliged, but could not help thinking that a night of unbroken rest would have been more conducive to that end. The spirit must have heard him thinking, for it said immediately, Your reclamation, then. Take heed. It put out a strong hand as it spoke and grasped him gently by the arm. Rise and walk with me. It would have been in vain for Scrooge to plead that the weather and the hour were not apt to pedestrian purposes. The bed was warm, and the thermometer a long way below freezing. That he was clad but lightly in his slippers and dressing gown and nightcap, and that he had a cold upon him at this time. The grasp, though gentle as a woman's hand, was not to be resisted. He rose, but finding that the spirit made towards the window, clasped its road in supplication. I am a mortal, Scrooge said, and liable to fall. Bear but a touch of my hand there, said the spirit, laying it upon his heart, and you shall be upheld in more than this. As the words were spoken, they passed through the wall and stood upon an open country road, with fields on either hand. The city had not entirely vanquished. Not a vestige of it was to be seen. The darkness and the mist had vanished with it, for it was clear, cold winter day, with snow upon the ground. Good God, said Scrooge, grasping his hands together as he looked about him. I was bred in this place. I was a boy here. The spirit gazed upon him mildly. Its gentle touch, though it had been light and instantaneous, appeared still present with the old man's sense of feeling. He was conscious of 1,000 odors floating in the air, which one connected with 1,000 thoughts and hopes and joys and cares. Oh, how long, long forgotten. Hold on 1 second. Your lip is trembling, said the ghost. And what is that upon your cheek? Scrooge muttered with an unusual catching in his voice that it was a pimple, and he begged the ghost to lead him where it would. You recollect the way? Inquired the spirit. Remember it, cried Scrooge with a fervor. I could walk it blindfold. Strange to have forgotten it for so many years, observed the ghost. Let us go on. They walked along the road, Scrooge recognizing every gate and post and tree, until a little market town appeared in the distance with its bridge, its church, and winding river. Some shaggy ponies were now seen trotting towards them with boys upon their back, who called to other boys in country gigs and carts driven by farmers. All these boys were in great spirits and shouted to each other until the broad fields were so full of merry music that the crisp air laughed to hear it. "These are but shadows of the things that have been," said the ghost. "They have no consciousness of us." The travelers came on, and as they came, Scrooge knew and named them every one. Why, he rejoiced beyond all bounds to see them. Why did his cold eye glisten, and his heart lean up as they went past? Why was he filled with gladness when he heard them give each other Merry Christmas as they parted at roadways and byways for several homes? What was Merry Christmas to Scrooge? Out upon Merry Christmas, what good had it ever done him? "The school is not quite deserted," said the ghost. "A solitary child, neglected by his friends, is still there." Scrooge said that he knew, and he knew it, and he sobbed. They left the high road by a well-remembered lane, and soon approached a mansion of dull red brick with a little rooster cupola on the roof and a bell hanging in it. It was a large house, but one of broken fortunes, for the spacious offices were little used, and their walls were damp and mossy, their windows broken, and their gates decayed. Fowls clucked and strutted in the stables, and the coach houses and sheds were overrun with grass. Nor was it more retentive of its ancient state within, for entering the dreary hall and glancing through the open door of many rooms, they found them poorly furnished, cold and vast. There was an earthly savor in the air, a chilly bareness in the place, which associated itself somehow with too much getting up by candlelight and not too much to eat. They went, the ghost and Scrooge, across the hall to a door at the back of the house. It opened before them and disclosed a long, bare, melancholy room, made barer still by the lines of plain deal forms and desks. At one of these a lonely boy was reading near a feeble fire, and Scrooge sat down upon a form and wept to see his poor forgotten self as he had used to be. Not a laden echo in the house, not a squeak or shuffle from the mice behind the paneling, not a drip from the half-thawed waterspout in the dull yard behind. Not a sigh among the leafless boughs of one despondent poplar, not the idle swinging of an empty storehouse door, no, not the clinking of the fire, but fell upon the heart of Scrooge with softening influence, and gave him freer passage to tears that dropped down through his fingers as he spread his hands before his face. The spirit touched him on the arm and pointed to his younger self, intended upon his reading. Suddenly, a man in foreign garments, wonderfully real and distant to look at, stood outside the window with an axe stuck in his belt and leading a donkey laden with wood by the bridle. "Why, it's Ali Baba!" Scrooge exclaimed in ecstasy. "It's dear old honest Ali Baba. Yes, I know. One Christmas time when yonder solitary child was left here all alone, he did come, and he did the first time, just like that. Poor boy, and poor Valentine," said Scrooge, "and his wilder brother, Orson. There they go. And what's his name, who was put down in his drawers, asleep, at the gate of Damascus? Don't you see him? And the Sultan's groom turned upside down by the genie? There he is upon his head. Serve him right. I'm glad of it. What business did he have to be married to the princess?" To hear Scrooge expending all the eagerness of his nature on the subjects, in the most extraordinary voice, between laughing and crying, to see his heightened and excited face, would have been a surprise to his business friends in the city. Indeed, "There's the parrot," cried Scrooge. "Green body and yellow tailed, and the thing like a lettuce growing out of the top of his head. There he is. Poor Robin Crusoe. He called him. Where have you been, Robin Crusoe?" The man thought he was dreaming, but he wasn't. It was the parrot, you know. There goes Friday, running for his life to the little creek. And then, with a rapidly of transition, very foreign to his usual character, he, in pity for his former self, said, "Poor boy," and cried again. "I wish," Scrooge muttered, putting his hands in his pockets and looking about him after drying his eyes with his cuff, "but it's too late now." "What's the matter?" asked the spirit. "Nothing," said Scrooge. "Nothing. There was a boy singing a Christmas carol at my door last night, and I would have liked to have given him something. That's all." The ghost smiled thoughtfully and waved his hand, saying, as he did so, "Let us see another Christmas." Scrooge's former self grew larger at the words, and the room became a little darker and more dirtier. The panels shrunk, the windows cracked, the fragments of plaster fell out of the ceiling, and the naked laths were strewed inside. But how all this was brought about, Scrooge knew no more than you do. He only knew that it was quite correct, that everything had happened so that he was alone again, with all the other boys had gone home for the jolly holidays. He was not reading now, but walking up and down sparingly. Scrooge looked at the ghost with a mournful shaking of his head, glancing anxiously at the door. It opened, and a little girl, much younger than the boy, came darting in and put his arms around his neck and often kissed him, answering him as her dear, dear brother. "I have come to bring you home, dear brother," said the child, clapping her tiny hands and bending down to laugh. "To bring you home, home, home." "Home, little fan?" returned the boy. "Yes," said the child, brimful glee. Hold on. Okay. "Yes," said the child, brimful of glee. "Home for good and all. Home forever and ever. Father is so much kinder than he used to be, that home's like heaven. He spoke so gently to me one dear night when I was going to bed that I was not afraid to ask him once more if you might come home. And he said, yes, yes, you should. And he sent me in a coach to bring you. And you're to be a man," said the child, opening her eyes, "and you are never to come back here. But first, we'll be together all Christmas long and have the merriest time in all the world." "You're quite a woman, little fan," exclaimed the boy. She clapped her hands and laughed, and tried to touch his head, but being too little, laughed again and stood on tiptoe to embrace him. Then she began to drag him, in her childish eagerness, towards the door, and he, nothing loth to go, accompanied her. A terrible voice in the hall cried, "Bring down Master Scrooge's box there!" And in the hall appeared the schoolmaster himself, glared on Master Scrooge with a ferocious conscience, and drew him into a dreadful state of mind by shaking hands with him. Then conveyed him and his sister into the various old well of shivering best parlor that was ever seen, where the maps upon the wall and the celestial and terrestrial globes in the windows were waxy with cold. Here he produced a decanter of curiously light wine and a block of curiously heavy cake, and administered installments of those dainties to the young people, at the same time sending out a meager servant to offer a glass of something to the postboy, who answered that he thanked the gentleman, but if it was the same tap as he'd tasted before, he'd rather not. Master Scrooge's trunk by this time was tied on the top of the chassis, and the children bade the schoolmaster goodbye, right willing, and getting into it, drove gaily down the garden sweep, the quick wheels dashing the frost and snow from off the dark leaves of the evergreens like spray. Always a delicate creature, whom a breath would have withered, said the ghost. She had a large heart. So she did, cried Scrooge. You're right. I'll not gainsay it, spirit, God forbid. She died a woman, said the ghost, and had, as I think, children. One child. True, said the ghost. Your nephew. Scrooge seemed uneasy in his mind and answered briefly, yes. Although they had but for a moment left the school behind them, they were now in the busy thoroughfares of a city, where shadowy passengers passed and repassed in one unbroken throng, where shadowy carts and coaches battled for the way, and all the strife and tumult of the real city were. It was made plain enough by the dressing of the shops that here too it was Christmas time again, but it was evening and the streets were lighted up. The ghost stopped at a certain warehouse door and asked Scrooge if he knew it. Know it, said Scrooge. I was apprenticed here. They went in, at the sight of an old gentleman in a Welsh wig sitting behind such a high desk that if he had been 2 inches taller he must have knocked his head against the ceiling. Scrooge cried in great excitement, Why, it's old Fezziwig! Bless his heart, Fezziwig alive again! Old Fezziwig laid down his pen and looked up at the clock, which pointed to the hour of 7. Rubbing his hands and adjusting his capacious waistcoat, laughed all over himself, from the shoes to his organ of benevolence, and called out in a comfortable, oily, rich, fat, jovial voice, Yo-ho there, Ebenezer, Dick! Scrooge's former self, now grown a young man, came briefly in, accompanied by his fellow prentice. Dick Williams, to be sure, said Scrooge to the ghost. Lord bless me, yes, there he is. Ah, he was very much attached to me, was Dick, poor Dick, dear. Yo-ho, my boys, said Fezziwig. No more work tonight. Christmas Eve, Dick. Christmas, Ebenezer. Let's have the shutters up, cried old Fezziwig with a sharp clap of his hands, before a man can say Jack Robinson. You wouldn't believe how these two fellows went at it. They charged into the street with the shutters, 1, 2, 3, had them up in their places, 4, 5, 6, pinned 'em and barred 'em, 7, 8, 9, and came back before you could have got to 12, panting like racehorses. Hilly-ho, cried Fezziwig, skipping from his high desk with wonderful agility. Clear away, my lads, we've got to have lots of room here. Hilly-ho, Dick, cheer up, Ebenezer. Clear away? There was nothing they couldn't have cleared away, or they wouldn't have cleared away, or couldn't have cleared away, with old Fezziwig looking on. It was done in a minute. Every movable was packed off as if it were dismissed from public life for evermore. The floor was swept and watered, and the lamps were trimmed, fuel was heaped upon the fire, and the warehouse was as snug and warm and dry and bright a ballroom as you had seen upon a winter's night. In came the fiddler with the massive book, and went up to the lofty desk and made an orchestra of it, and tuned like 50 stomach aches. In came Miss Fezziwig, one very substantial smile. In came 3 Mrs. Fezziwigs, beaming and lovable. In came the 6 young followers whose hearts they broke. In came all the young men and women employed in the business. In came the housemaid with her cousin, the baker. In came the cook with her brother's particular friend, the milkman. In came the boy from over the way who was suspicious of not having board enough from his master, trying to hide himself behind a girl from next door, but one who was proved to have had her ears pulled by her missus. In they all came, one after another, some shyly, some boldly, some gracefully, some awkwardly. some pushing and some pulling. In they all came, somehow and everyhow. Away they all went, 20 couples at once, hands half round and back again the other way, down the middle and up again, round and round in various stages of affectionate grouping. Old top couple always turning up in the wrong place. New top couple staring off again as soon as they got there. All top couples at last, and not a bottom one to help them. When this result was brought about, old Fezziwig, clapping his hands to stop the dance, cried out, "Well done!" And the fiddler plunged his hot face into a bowl of porter, especially provided for that purpose. But scoring rest upon his reappearance, he instantly began again, though there were no dancers yet, as if the other fiddler had been carried home, exhausted on a shutter, and he were a brand new man resolved to beat him out of sight or perish. There were more dancers, and there were more forfeits, and more dances, and there was cake, and there was negus, and there was a great piece of cold roast, and there was a great piece of cold broiled, and there was mince pies and plenty of beer. But the great effect of the evening after the roast and broil was the fiddler, an artful dog, mind you, the sort of man who knew his business better than you or I could have told him, struck up Sir Roger de Coverley. Then old Fezziwig stood out to dance with Miss Fezziwig, top couple too, with a good stiff piece of work cut out for them, 3 or 4 and 20 pair of the partners. People who were not to be trifled with, people who would dance and had no notion of walking. But if there had been twice as many, 4 times, old Fezziwig would have been a match for them, and so would Miss Fezziwig. As to her, she was worthy to be his partner in every sense of the term. If that's not high praise, tell me higher, and I'll use it. A positive light appeared to issue from Fezziwig's calves. They shone in every part of the dance like moons. You couldn't have predicted at any given time what would have become of them next. And then old Fezziwig and Miss Fezziwig had gone all through the dance, advance and retire, holding hands with your partner, bow and curtsy, corkscrew, thread the needle, and back again to your place. Fezziwig cut so deftly that he appeared to wink with his legs and came upon his feet again without a stagger. When the clock struck 11 and the domestic ball broke up, Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig took their stations, one on either side the door, and shaking hands with every person individually, or as he and she went out, wished him or her a Merry Christmas. When everybody had retired, but the 2 prentices, they did the same to them. Thus the cheerful voices died away, and the lads were left to their beds, which were under a counter in the back shop. During the whole time, Scrooge had acted like a man out of his wits. His heart and soul were in the scene, and with his former self. He collaborated everything, and remembered everything, and enjoyed everything, and underwent the strangest agitation. It was not until now, when the bright faces of his former self and Dick were turned from them, that he remembered the ghost, and became conscious that it was looking upon him, while the light upon its head burnt very clear. "A small matter," said the ghost, "to make these silly folks so full of gratitude." "Small?" echoed Scrooge. The spirit signed to him to listen to the 2 apprentices, who were pouring out their hearts in praise of Fezziwig, and when he had done so, said, "Why, is it not? He spent but a few pounds of your mortal money, 3 or 4 perhaps. Is that so much that he deserves praise?" "It isn't that," said Scrooge, heated by the remark and speaking unconsciously, like his former, not his latter, self. "It isn't that, spirit. He has the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. Say that his power lies in words and looks, in things so slight and insignificant that it is impossible to add and count them up. What then? The happiness he gives is quite great, as if it cost a fortune." He felt the spirit's glaze and stopped. "What's the matter?" asked the ghost. "Nothing particular," said Scrooge. Something, I think. No, said Scrooge. No, I should like to be able to say a word or two to my clerk just now, that's all. Scrooge's former self turned down the lamps as he gave utterance to the wish, and Scrooge and the ghost again stood side by side in the open air. My time grows short, observed the ghost. Quick. This was not addressed to Scrooge, or to anyone who could see, but it produced an immediate effect. For again, Scrooge saw himself. He was older now, a man in the prime of his life. His face had not the harsh and rigid lines of later years, but it had begun to wear the signs of care and avarice. There was an eager, greedy, restless motion in his eye, which showed the passion that had taken root, and where the shadow of the growing tree would fall. He was not alone, but he sat by the side of a fair young girl in a mourning dress, in whose eyes there were tears, which sparkled in the light that shone out the ghost of Christmas past. It matters little, she said softly, to you, very little. Another idol has displaced me, and if it can cheer and comfort you in the time to come, as I would have tried to, I have no just cause to grieve. What idol has replaced you? He rejoined. A golden one. This is the even-handed dealing of the world, he said. There is nothing on which is so hard as poverty. There is nothing it professes to condemn with such severity as the pursuit of wealth. You fear the world too much, she answered gently. All your hopes have merged into one hope of being beyond that chance of its reproach. I have seen your nobler aspirations fall off one by one until the master passion, gain, engrosses you. Have I not? What then? He retorted. Even if I have grown so much wiser, what then? I have not changed towards you. She shook her head. Am I? Our contract is an old one. It was made when we were both poor and content to be so, until, in good season, we would improve our worldly fortune by our patient industry. You are changed, and when it was made, you were another man. I was a boy, he said impatiently. Your own feelings tell you that you are not what you are, she returned. I am, that which promised happiness when we were one in heart, and fraught with misery now that we are two. How often and how keenly I have thought of this, I will not say. It is enough that I have thought of it, and can release you. Have I ever sought release? In words? No, never. And what then? In a changed nature, in an altered spirit, in another atmosphere of life, another hope as its great end, in everything that made my love of any worth or value in your sight. If this had never been between us, said the girl, looking mildly, but with steadiness upon him, tell me, would you seek me out and try to win me now? Ah, no. He seemed to yield to the justice of this supposition, in spite of himself, but he said with a struggle, You think not? I would gladly think otherwise if I could, she answered. Heaven and my own soul decide. When I have learned a truth like this, I know how strong and irresistible it must be. If you were free today, tomorrow, yesterday, can even I believe that you would choose a dowerless orphan girl, you, who in your own confidence with her weigh everything by gain, or choosing her if for a moment you were false enough to your own one guiding principle to do so? I do not know that your repentance and regret would surely follow. I do, and I release you, with a full heart, for the love of him you once were. He was about to speak, but with another hand turned from him, she resumed, You may. The memory of what is past half makes me hope you will have pain in this, a very, very brief time, and you will dismiss the recollection of it gladly, as an unprofitable dream from which it happened well that you awoke. May you be happy in the life that you've chosen. She left him, and they parted. Spirit, said Scrooge, show me no more. Conduct me home. Why do you delight in torturing me? One shadow more, exclaimed the ghost. "No more," cried Scrooge. "No more. I do not wish to see it. Show me no more." But the relentless ghost pinned him in both arms and forced him to observe what happened next. They were in another scene, in a place, a room, not a very large or handsome, but full of comfort. Near to the winter fire sat a beautiful young girl, so like the last that Scrooge believed it was the same until he saw her, now a commonly matron, sitting opposite her daughter. The noise in this room was perfectly tumultuous, for there were more children there than Scrooge, in his agitated state of mind, could count. And unlike the celebrated herd in the poem, there were not 40 children conducting themselves like one, but every child was conducting itself like 40. The consequences were uproarious beyond belief, but no one seemed to care. On the contrary, the mother and daughter laughed heartily and enjoyed it very much, and the latter soon began to mingle in the sports, so pillaged by the young brigands most ruthlessly. What would I not have given to be one of them? Though I could never have been so rude. No, no. I wouldn't for all the wealth of the world have crushed that braided hair or torn it down for the dainty little shoe. I wouldn't have plucked it off. God bless my soul to save my life. As to measuring her waist in sport, as they did, I could not have done it. I should have expected my arm to have grown round it for a punishment and never come straight again. And yet I should have dearly liked it, my own, to touch her lips, to question her that she might have opened them, to look upon the lashes of her downcast eyes, and never raise a blush, to let loose waves of hair in an inch, which would have been a keepsake price. In short, I should have liked. I do confess that I would have the lightest license of a child, and yet been so many to know its value. But now knocking to the door was heard, and such a rush immediately ensued that she, with laughing face and plundered dress, was borne towards it in the center of a flushed and boisterous group, just in time to greet the father, who, in observance of the custom annually maintained in that family on Christmas Eve, came home attended by a man laden with Christmas toys and presents. Then the shouting and the struggling and the onslaught that was made on the defenseless porter, scaling him with chairs instead of ladders, to dive into his pockets, despoiled him of the brown paper parcels, holding on tight by his cravat, hugged him round the neck, pummeled him back, and kicked his legs in irresistible affection. The shouts of wonder and delight with which the development of every package was received, the terrible announcement that the baby had been taken in the act of pulling a doll's frying pan into his mouth, and was more than suspected of having swallowed a fictitious turkey on a wooden platter. The immense relief of finding this was a false alarm. The joy and gratitude and ecstasy, then all indescribable alike. It is enough by the degree of children that their emotions got out of the parlor, and by one stair at a time, up to the top of the house, where they went to bed and subsided. And now Scrooge looked more attentively than ever when the master of the house, having his daughter leaning fondly on him, sat down with her and her mother at the own fireside, and when he thought that such another creature, quite as graceful and full promise, might have called him father, and began a springtime and a haggard winter of his life, he saw his sight grew very dim indeed. "Belle," said the husband, turning to his wife with a smile, "I saw an old friend of yours this afternoon." "Who was it?" "Guess." "How can I, Tut? I don't know," she added in the same breath, laughing as he laughed. "Mr. Scrooge? Mr. Scrooge it was. I passed his office window, and as it wasn't shut up, and he had a candle inside, I could scarcely help seeing him. His partner lies upon the point of death, I hear, and there he sat alone, quite alone in the world, do I believe." "Spirit," said Scrooge in a broken voice, "remove me from this place." "I told you that these were the shadows of things that have been," said the ghost, "that they are not what they are. that they are what they are. Don't blame me. Remove me, exclaims Scrooge exclaimed. I cannot bear it. He turned upon the ghost, and seeing that it looked upon him with a face in which, in some strange way, there were fragments of all the faces had shown him, wrestled with it. Leave me, take me back, haunt me no longer. In the struggle, if it can be called a struggle, in which the ghost, with no visible resistance on its own part, was disturbed by any effect of adversary. Excuse me. Scrooge observed that its light was burning high and bright and dimly connected that with its influence over him. He seized the extinguisher cap and by a sudden action pressed it upon his head. The spirit dropped beneath it so that the extinguisher covered his whole form, but though Scrooge pressed it down upon his force, he could not hide the light which streamed from under it in one unbroken flood upon the ground. He was conscious of being exhausted and overcome by an irresistible drowsiness, and, further, being in his own bedroom, he gave the cap a parting squeeze in which his hand relaxed, and had barely enough time to reel to bed before he sank into a heavy sleep. And now we will take our second intermission before we begin stave 3. Again, during the intermission, I encourage you to follow the QR code to make a donation to Rare Breed if you are enjoying this live stream. So I will be back in a few minutes. are back for, excuse me, Stave 3, the longest one, but my favorite one. If you've not noticed, I'm wearing an early Christmas present from my wife. It is the Muppet Christmas Carol characters, specifically Rizzo the Rat and Gonzo, who played the part of Charles Dickens in it. They were the narrators. So, yeah, very fitting fit this year. So, all right. Also, forgot, this is my YouTube channel that I am streaming on when I'm not doing this during the spring. Whenever there's severe and tornadic weather in our area of Southwest Missouri, I will tried it out once or twice this spring, and it went really well. But I will live stream the radar, just because I feel like half the time a lot of local places are maybe a little slow going live. And I love weather. I love explaining to people how to read radar so that they're safer for when it comes. So if you would like a little extra coverage this spring when all of the weather starts up, subscribe to this YouTube channel and make sure you turn on the notifications, so that way when I go live, when there is something severe happening, you will know, and I will be there. So anyway, so that is that. All right. Stave 3, the second of the three spirits. Awaken in the middle of a tough snore, and sitting up in bed to get his thoughts together, Scrooge on no occasion to be told that the bell was again upon the stroke of 1. He felt that he was resorted to consciousness in the right nick of time, for the especial purpose of holding a conference with the second messenger dispatched to him through Jacob Marley's intervention. But finding that he turned uncomfortably cold when he began to wonder which of his curtains this new specter would draw back, he put them every one aside with his own hands, and laying back again, established a sharp look around all the bed. For he wished to challenge the spirit on the moment of its appearance, and did not like to be taken by surprise and made nervous. Gentlemen of the free and easy sort, who plume themselves on being acquainted with a move or two, and being usually equal to the time of day, express the wide range of their capacity for adventure by observing that they are good for anything from pitch and toss to manslaughter, between which opposite extremes no doubt there lies a tolerably wide and comprehensive range of subjects. Without venturing for Scrooge quite as hardly as this, I don't mind calling on you to believe that he was ready for a good broad field of strange appearances, and that nothing between a baby and a rhinoceros would have astonished him very much. At last, however, he began to think, as you or I would have thought at first, for it is always the person not in the predicament who knows that ought to have been done in it, and would consequently have done it. At least I say, he began to think that the source and secret of this ghostly light being in the adjoining room, from whence, no further tracing it, it seemed to shine. This idea taking full possession of his mind, he got up softly and shuffled in his slippers to the door. The moment Scrooge's hand went on the lock, a strange voice called him by his name and bade him to enter. He obeyed, and thrusting in his head. In his own room, there was no doubt about it, but it had undergone a surprising transformation. The walls and the ceiling were so hung with living green that it looked a perfect grove, from every part of which bright gleaming berries glistened. The crisp leaves of holly, mistletoe, and ivy reflected back the light as if many little mirrors had been scattered there, and such a mighty blaze went roaring up the chimney as that dull petrification of a hearth had never gone in Scrooge's name, or Marley's, or for that matter, for many a winter season gone. Heaped upon the floor to the form of a kind of throne were turkeys, geese, game, poultry, brawn, great joints of meat, suckling pigs, long wreaths of sausages, mince pies, plum pudding, and barrels of oysters, red hot chestnuts, cherry cheeked apples, juicy oranges, luscious pears, immense twelfth cakes, and seething bowls of punch that made the chamber dim with their delicious steam. In easy state upon this couch there sat a jolly giant, glorious to see, who bore a glowing torch in shape not unlike Plenty's horn, and held it up, high up, to shed its light on Scrooge as he came around the corner. "Come in," exclaimed the ghost. "Come in and know me better, man." Scrooge entered timidly and hung his head before the spirit. He was not the dogged Scrooge he had been, and though his eyes were clear and kind, he did not like to meet him. "I am the ghost of Christmas past," said the spirit. "Look upon me." Scrooge reverently did so. It was clothed in one simple, deep green robe or mantle bordered with white fur. This garment hung so loosely on the figure that its capacious breast was bare, as if disdaining to be warded or concealed by any artifact. Its feet, observably beneath the ample folds of garment, were also bare, and on its head it wore no other covering other than a holly wreath set here and there with shimmering icicles. Its dark brown curls were long and free as its genial face. Its sparkling eyes, its open hand, its cheery voice, its unconstrained demeanor, and its joyful air. Girded around in the middle was an antique scabbard, but no sword was in it, and the ancient sheath was eaten up with rust. "You have never seen the likes of me before," exclaimed the spirit. "Never," Scrooge made an answer to it. "Have you never walked forth with the younger members of my family, meaning, for I am very young, my elder brothers born in these later years?" pursued the phantom. "I don't think I have," said Scrooge. "I'm afraid I have not. Have you many brothers, spirit?" "More than 1,800, said the ghost. "A tremendous family to provide for," muttered Scrooge. The ghost of Christmas present rose, and as it did so, Scrooge observed that at its skirts it seemed to have some object which it sought to hide. He fancied that he saw either a claw of a great bird or a foot much smaller than the spirit's own, protruding for a moment from its robe, and being curious in everything concerning these unearthly visitors, he asked the spirit what it meant. "They are not so many as they might be," replied the ghost. "Who cared to know or ask? No matter what it is just now. Are you ready to go forth with me?" "Spirit," said Scrooge submissively, "conduct me where you will. I went forth last night on compulsion, and I learnt a lesson which is working now. Tonight, if you have aught to teach me, let me profit by it." "Touch my robe." Scrooge did so, and held it fast. The house fronts looked black enough, and the winds blacker, constraining with the smooth white sheet of snow upon the roofs, and with the dirtier snow upon the ground, which last deposit had been plowed up in the deep furrows by heavy wheels of carts and wagons, furrows that crossed and recrossed each other hundreds of times, where the great thoroughfares breached off and made intricate channels, hard to trace in the thick yellow mud and icy water. The sky was gloomy, and the shortest streets were choked up with the dingy mist, half thawed, half frozen, whose heavier particles descended in a shower of sooty atoms, as if all the chimneys in Great Britain had by one consent caught fire, and were blazing away to their dear hearts' content. This was nothing very cheerful in the climate or the town, and yet there was an air of cheerfulness abroad, and the clearest summer air and brightest summer sun might have endeavored to refuse in vain. For the people who were shoveling on the housetops were jovial and full of glee, calling out to one another from the parapets, and now then exchanging a fictitious snowball, better natured missile far than many a word's jest, laughing heartily if it went right, and not less heartily if it went wrong. The poulterers' shops were still half open, and the fruiters were radiant in their glory. There were great, round, pot-bellied baskets of chestnuts, shaped like the waistcoats of jolly old gentlemen, lolling the doors and tumbling out in the streets in their pelagic opulence. There were ruddy, brown-faced, broad-girthed Spanish onions shining in the fatness of their glow like Spanish fires, and winking from their shelves in wanton shyness as girls went by and glanced dimly as they hung up the mistletoe. There were pears and apples clustered high in blooming pyramids. There were bunches of grapes made in the shopkeeper's benevolence to dangle from the capacious hooks that people's mouths might water, gratis, as they passed. There were piles of filberts, mossy and brown, recall in their fragrant ancient walks among the woods, and the pleasant shuffling, ankle-deep, through the weathered leaves. There were Norfolk biffins, squabble and swarthy, setting off the yellow of the oranges and lemons, and in great compactness of their juicy persons, urgently entreating and beseeching to each to be carried home in paper bags and eaten after dinner. The very gold and silver fish set forth among the dainties in a bowl through members of dull and stagnant blooded race appeared to know that there was something going on, and to the fish went gasping round and round their little world in slow and passionless excitement. But soon the steeples called good people all to church and chapel, and away they came, flocking through the streets in their best clothes and with their gayest faces. And at the same time they emerged for scores of by streets, lanes, and nameless turnings, innumerable people carrying their dinners to the bakers' shops. The sight of these poor revelers appearing to interest the spirit very much so, for he stood with Scrooge beside him in the baker's doorway, and taking off the covers of their bearers, passed sprinkled fire upon their dinners from his torch. And it was a very uncommon kind of torch, for once or twice when they were angry words between some dinner carriers who had jostled each other, shed a few drops of water on them from it, and a good humor was restored directly. For they said it was a shame to quarrel upon Christmas Day, and so it was, God love it, so it was. In the time the bells ceased and the bakers were shut up, and yet there was a genial shadowing forth of all these dinners and the progress of their cooking, and the thawed blotch of wet above each baker's oven, and the pavement smoked as if the stones were cooking too. "Is there a peculiar flavor in the fire that you sprinkle from your torch?" asked Scrooge. "There is, my own." "Would it apply to any kind of dinner on this day?" asked Scrooge. "To any kindly given. To a poor one most." "Why to a poor one most?" asked Scrooge. "Because it needs it most." "Spirit," said Scrooge after a thought, "I wonder you, of all the beings in the many worlds about us, should you desire to cramp these people opportunities of innocent enjoyment?" "I?" cried the spirit proudly. "Why, you have deprived them of their means of dining every seventh day, often the only day in which they can be said to dine at all," said Scrooge. "Wouldn't you?" "I?" cried the spirit. "You seek to close these places on the seventh day," said Scrooge, "and it comes to the same thing." "I seek!" exclaimed the spirit. "Forgive me if I'm wrong." "It has been done in your name, or at least in that of your family," said Scrooge. "There are some upon this world of yours," returned the spirit, who lay claim to know us, and who do their deeds of passion, pride, ill will, hatred, envy, bigotry, and selfishness in our name, who are as strange to us and all of our kith and kin as if they had never lived. Remember that, and charge their doings to themselves, not us." Scrooge promised that he would, and then they went on, invisible as they had been before, into the suburbs of the town. It was a remarkable property of the ghost, which Scrooge observed at the baker's, that notwithstanding his giant size, he accommodated himself into any place with ease, and that he stood beneath a low roof quite gracefully, and like a supernatural creature, as it was possible he could have done in any lofty hall. And perhaps it was the pleasure of the good spirit had in showing off his power of his, or else it was his own kind, generous, hearty nature, and his sympathy with all poor men, that led him straight to Scrooge's clerks, for there he went, and he took Scrooge with him, holding his robe, and on the threshold of the door the spirit smiled and stopped to bless Bob Cratchit's dwelling with the sprinkling of his torch. Think of that. Bob had but 15 bob a week himself. He pocketed on Saturdays but 15 copies of his Christian name, and yet the ghost of Christmas present blessed his 4-roomed house. Then uprose Miss Cratchit, Cratchit's wife, dressed out but poorly in a twice-turned gown, but brave in ribbons, which are cheap and good, and make a goodly show for sixpence, and she had laid the cloth, assisted by Belinda Cratchit, second of her daughters, also brave in ribbons, while Master Peter Cratchit plunged a fork into the saucepan of potatoes, and getting the corners of his monstrous shirt-collar, Bob's private property, conferred upon his son and heir in honor of the day, into his mouth, rejoiced to find himself gaily attired, and yearned to show his linen in fashionable parks. And now the two smaller Cratchits, boy and girl, came tearing in, screaming that outside the baker's they had smelt the goose and had known it for their own, and basking in the luxurious thoughts of sage and onion, these young Cratchits danced about the table and exalted Master Peter Cratchit to the skies, while he, not proud although his collars nearly choked him, blew the fire until the slow potatoes, bubbling up, knocked loudly at the saucepan lid, to be let out and peeled. "What has got your precious father, then?" asked Miss Cratchit, "and your brother Tim, and Martha weren't so late last Christmas Day by half an hour." "Here's Martha, mother," said a girl, appearing as she spoke. "Here's Martha, mother," cried the two youngest Cratchit. "Hurrah! There's such a goose, Martha." "Why, bless your heart alive, my dear, how late you are," said Miss Cratchit, kissing her a dozen times and taking off her shawl and bonnet for her, with officious zeal. We'd a deal of work to finish up last night," replied the girl, "and we had to clear away this morning, mother." "Well, never mind, so long as you come here," said Miss Cratchit. "Sit you down by the fire, my dear, and have a warm. Lord bless ye." "No, no, there's father coming," cried the two young Cratchits, who were everywhere at once. "Hide, Martha, hide." So Martha hid herself, and in came little Bob, the father, with at least 3 feet of comforter, exclusive of the fringe hanging down below him, and his threadbare clothes darned up and bushed, looking so seizable, and Tiny Tim upon his shoulder. Alas for Tiny Tim! He bore a little crutch, and had his limbs supported by an iron frame. "Why, where's Martha?" cried Bob Cratchit, looking around. Not coming, said Miss Cratchit. "Not coming?" said Bob, with a sudden declension in his high spirits, for he had been Tim's blood horse all the way home from church and had some rampant. "Not coming on Christmas Day?" Martha didn't like to see him disappointed, even if it were only in joke, so she came out prematurely from behind the door and ran into his arms, while the two young Cratchits hustled Tiny Tim and bore him off to the wash-house, that he might hear the pudding singing in the copper. "And how did little Tim behave?" asked Miss Cratchit, when she rallied Bob on his credulity, and Bob had hugged his daughter till his heart's content. "As good as gold," said Bob, "and better. Somehow he gets thoughtful sitting by himself so much, and thinks the strangest things you'd ever heard. He told me coming home that he'd hoped that people saw him in the church because he was a cripple, and it might be pleasant to them to remember upon Christmas Day who made lame beggars walk and blind men see. Bob's voice was tremulous when he told them this, and trembled more when he said that Tiny Tim had grown strong and hearty. His active little crutch was heard upon the floor, and back came Tiny Tim before another word was spoken, escorted by his brother and sister to his stool before the fire, and while Bob, turning up his cuffs, as if, poor fellow, they were capable of being made more shabby, compounded some hot mixture in a jug with gin and lemons, and stirred it round and put it on the hob to simmer. Master Peter and the two ubiquitous young Cratchits went to fetch the goose, with which they soon returned in high procession. Such a bustle ensued that you might have thought that the goose the rarest of all birds, a feathered phenomenon, to which a black swan was a matter of course, and in truth it was something very like it in that house. Miss Cratchit made the gravy, ready beforehand in a little saucepan, hissing hot. Master Peter mashed the potatoes with incredible vigor. Miss Belinda sweetened up the applesauce. Martha dusted the hot plates. Peter took Tiny Tim beside him in the tiny corner at the table, and the two young Cratchits set chairs up for everyone, not forgetting themselves, and mounting guard upon their posts, cramming spoons into their mouths, lest they should shriek for goose before their turn can be helped. At last the dishes were set on, and grace was said. It was succeeded by a breathless pause as Miss Cratchit, looking slowly all along the carving knife, prepared to plunge into the breast. But when she did, and when came the long-expected gush of stuffing issued forth, one murmur of delight arose all around the board, and even Tiny Tim, excited by the two young Cratchits, beat on the table with the handle of this knife, and feebly cried, "Hurrah!" There was never such a goose. Bob said he didn't believe that there was such a goose cooked. Its tenderness and flavor, size and cheapness were the themes of universal admiration. Eked out by the applesauce and mashed potatoes, it was a sufficient dinner for the whole family. Indeed, as Miss Cratchit said with great delight, surveying one small atom of a bone upon the dish, that hadn't eaten in all this steep in sage and onion. Hold on. They hadn't ate it all at last, yet every one of them had, and the youngest Cratchits in particular were steeped in sage and onion to their eyebrows. But now the plates being changed by Miss Belinda, Miss Cratchit left the room, too nervous to bear witness, to take the pudding up and bring it in. Suppose it should not be done enough. Suppose it should break in turning it out. Suppose someone should have gotten over the wall of the backyard and stolen it while they were merry with the goose, a supposition at which the two young Cratchits became livid. All sorts of horrors were supposed. Although a great deal of steam, the pudding was out of the copper, a smell like a washing day. That was the cloth, a smell like an eating house, and a pastry cook's next door to each other, with the laundress's next door to that. And there was the pudding. In half a minute, Miss Cratchit entered, flushed but smiling proudly with the pudding, like a speckled cannonball, so firm and hard, blazing in half of a quartern of ignited brandy, and a bedlight with Christmas holly stuck into the top. Oh, a wonderful pudding! Bob said, and calmly too, that he regarded it as the greatest success achieved by Miss Cratchit since their marriage. Miss Cratchit said that now the weight was off her mind, and she should confess that she had her doubts about the quality of flour. Everyone had something to say about it, but no one said or thought that it was a small pudding for such a large family. It would have been flat heresy to do so. Any Cratchit would have blushed at the hint of such a thing. At last the dinner was all done. The clothes was cleared, the hearth swept, and the fire made up. The compound in a jug being tasted and considered perfect. Apples and oranges were put upon the table, and a shovelful of chestnuts on the fire. Then all the Cratchit family drew round the hearth in what Bob called a circle, meaning a half of one. and at Bob's elbow stood the family display of glass, 2 tumblers and a custard cup without a handle. These held the hot stuff from the jug, however, as well as golden goblets would have done, and Bob served it out with beaming lips, while the chestnuts on the fire sputtered and crackled noisily. Then Bob proposed, "A Merry Christmas to us all, my dears. God bless us." With which all of the family echoed, "God bless us, everyone," said Tiny Tim, the last of all. He sat very close to his father's side upon his little stool. Bob held his withered little hand in his, as if he loved the child and wished to keep him by his side and dreaded the day that he might be taken. "Spirit," said Scrooge, with an interest he had never felt before, "tell me if Tiny Tim will live." "I see a vacant seat," replied the ghost, "in the poor chimney corner, and a crutch without an owner, carefully preserved. The child will die." "No, no," said Scrooge. "Oh, no, kind spirit, say that he will be spared." "No other of my race," returned the ghost, "will find him here." "What then?" If he be like to die, he had better do it, and decrease the surplus population." Scrooge hung his head to hear his own words quoted by the spirit, was somewhat overcome with penance and grief. "Man," said the ghost, "if a man be in heart and not adamant, forbear that wicked can't until you have discovered what the surplus is and where it is. Will you, and such as you, decide what men shall live and what men shall die? It may be that in the sight of heaven you are more worthless and less fit to live than the millions like this poor man's child. O God, to hear the insect on the leaf pronouncing on the too much life among his hungry brothers in the dust." Scrooge bent before the ghost's rebuke, and trembling cast his eyes upon the ground, but he raised them speedily upon hearing his own name. "Mr. Scrooge," said Bob, "I'll give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast." "The founder of the feast, indeed!" cried Miss Cratchit, reddening. "I wish I had him here. I'd give him a piece of my mind to feast upon, and I hope he'd have a good appetite for it." "My dear," said Bob, "the children, Christmas Day." "It should be Christmas Day, I'm sure," she said, "on which one drinks to the health of such an odious, stingy, hard, unfeeling man as Mr. Scrooge. You know he is, Robert. Nobody knows it better than you, poor fellow." "My dear," was Bob's mild answer, "Christmas Day." "I'll drink for his health for your sake and the day's," said Miss Cratchit, "not for his. Long life to him, a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. He'll be very happy and merry, and very happy, I have no doubt." The children drank the toast after, and it was the first of their proceedings which had no heartiness in it. Tiny Tim drank it last of all, but he didn't care 2 pence for it. Scrooge was the ogre of the family. The mention of his name cast a dark shadow on the party, which was not dispelled for a full 5 minutes. After it passed away, they were 10 times happier than before from the much relief of Scrooge. The baleful being done with, Bob Cratchit told them how he had a situation in his eye for Master Peter, which would bring in, if obtained, full 5 and 6 pence weekly. The 2 younger Cratchits laughed tremendously at the idea of Peter's being a man of business, and Peter himself looked thoughtfully at the fire between his collars, as if he were deliberating what particular investments he should favor when he came into the receipt of that bewildering income. Martha, who was a poor apprentice at the miller's, then told them what kind of work she had to do, and had many hours she had work at a stretch, and how she meant to lie abed tomorrow morning for a good long rest, tomorrow being a holiday she passed at home. Also, how she had seen a countess and a lord some days before, and how the lord was much about as tall as Peter, as which Peter pulled up his collar so high that you couldn't have seen his head if you had been there. All the time the chestnuts in the jug went round and by they sang a song about 2 lost children traveling in the snow, from Tiny Tim, who had a plaintive little voice, and sang it well indeed. There was nothing of high mark in this house. They were not a handsome family. They were not dressed well. Their shoes were far from being waterproof. Their clothes were scant, and Peter might have known, and very likely did, the inside of a pawnbroker's. But they were happy, grateful, pleased with one another, and content with the time. And when they faded, and looked happier yet in the bright sparklings of the Spirit's torch at parting. Scrooge had his eye upon them, and especially on Tiny Tim until the last. By this time it was getting dark, and snow pretty heavily. And as Scrooge and the Spirit went along the streets, the brightness of the roaring fires in the kitchens, parlors, and all sorts of rooms were wonderful. Here, the flickering of the blaze showed preparations for a cozy dinner, with hot plates baking through and through before the fire, and deep red curtains ready to be drawn to shut out cold and darkness. All the children of the house were running out into the snow to meet married sisters, brothers, cousins, uncles, aunts, and be the first to greet them. Here again, the shadows on the window blind of guests assembled. And there, a group of handsome girls, all hooded and fur-booted, and all chattering at once, tripped lightly off to some near neighbor's house, who upon the single man who saw them entered. But if you had not judged them for the number of people on their way to friendly greetings, you might have thought that one was at home to give them welcome and got there. Instead, every house expected company, and piling up its fires half chimney high, blessing on it how this ghost exuded, how it swung its torch and bared its breath and opened its capacious palm and floated on, outpouring with a generous hand its bright and harmless fire on everything within its reach. The very lamplighter who ran on before dotting the dusky street with the specks of light, and who was dressed to spend the evening somewhere laughing out loud as the Spirit passed, though little keened the lamplighter that had any company but Christmas. And now, without a word of warning from the ghost, they stood upon a bleak and desert moor, where monstrous masses of rude stone were cast about as though it were the burial place of giants, and water spread itself wheresoever it listed, or would have done so, but for the frost that held its prisoner. And nothing grew but moss and furze and coarse rank grass. Down in the west, the setting sun had left a streak of fiery red, which glared upon the desolation for an instant, like a sullen eye, and frowning lower yet, was lost on the thick gloom of the darkest night. "What place is this?" asked Scrooge. "A place where miners live, who labor in the bowels of the earth," returned the Spirit. "But they know me. See." A light shone from a window of a hut, and swiftly they advanced towards it. Passing through the wall of mud and stone, they found a cheerful company assembled around a glowing fire, an old man and woman with their children, and their children's children, and another generation beyond that, all decked out gaily in their holiday attire. The old man, in a voice that seldom rose above the howling of the wind upon the barren waste, was singing them a Christmas song. It had been a very old song when he was a boy, and from time to time they all joined in the chorus. So surely they raised their voices, the old man got quite blithe and loud, and so surely they stopped, his vigor sank again. The Spirit did not tarry here, but bade Scrooge hold on to his robe, and passing on above the moor, spread whither? Not to sea, to sea. To Scrooge's horror, looking back, he saw the last of the land, frightful rigid rocks behind them, and his ears were deafened by the thundering of water as it rolled and roared and raged among the dreadful caverns that it had worn, and fiercely tried to undermine the earth. Built upon a dismal reef of sunken rocks, some league or so from shore, on which the waters chafed and dashed. The wild year through there stood a solitary lighthouse. Great heaps of seaweed clung to its base, and storm birds, cold of the wind, born of the wind, one might suppose, as seaweed of the water, and rose and fell about it like the waves they skimmed. But even there, two men watched the light made a fire that, through the loophole in the thick stone wall, shed a ray of brightness on the awful sea. Joining their hands over the rough table at which they sat, they wished each other Merry Christmas in their ongoing. In their can of grog, and one of them, the elder two, with his face all damaged and scarred with hard weather as a figurehead of an old ship might be, struck up a sturdy song that was strong song that was like a gale in itself. Again the ghost sped on, above the black and heavy sea, on and on, until, being far away as he told Scrooge, from any shore, they lighted on a ship. They stood beside the helmsman at the wheel, and look out from the bow. The officers who had the watch, dark ghostly figures in their several stations, but every man among them hummed a Christmas tune, or had a Christmas thought, or spoke below his breath to his companion of some bygone Christmas day, with homeward hopes belonging to it. And every man on board, waking and sleeping, good or bad, had a kinder word for another on that day that had any other day of the year, and had shared to some extent in the festivities, and had remembered those he cared for at a distance, and had known that they delighted to remember him. It was great surprise to Scrooge, while listening to the moan of the wind, and thinking what a seldom thing it was to move on through the lonely darkness over an unknown abyss, whose depths were secrets as profound as death. It was great surprise to Scrooge, while thus engaged, to hear a hearty laugh. It was a much greater surprise to Scrooge to recognize it was his own nephew's, and to find himself in a bright, dry, gleaming room, with the spirit standing smiley by his side, looking at the same nephew with approving affability. If you should happen to be, by any unlikely chance, to know a man more blessed in the laugh than Scrooge's nephew, all I can say is I'd like to meet him too. Introduce him to me, and I'll covet his acquaintance. It is a fair, even-hand, glorious adjustment of things that while there is infection in disease and sorrow, there is nothing in this world so irresistibly contagious as laughter and good humor. When Scrooge's nephew laughed in this way, holding his sides, rolling his head, and twisting his face into the most extravagant contortions, Scrooge's niece by marriage laughed as heartily as he, and their assembled friends, being not a bit behindhand, roared out as well. "He said that Christmas was a humbug, as I live," cried Scrooge's nephew. "He believed it, too." "More shame on him, Fred," said Scrooge's niece indignantly. "Bless those women. They never do anything by halves. They are always in earnest." She was very pretty, exceedingly pretty, with a dimpled, surprised-looking face, and dainty little mouth that seemed to be made to be kissed, as no doubt it was, all kinds of good little dots on her chin that melted into one another when she laughed, and the sunniest pair of eyes you ever saw on any little creature's head. Altogether, she was what you would have called provoking, you know, but satisfactory too. "He's a comical old fellow," said Scrooge's nephew. "That's the truth, and not so pleasant as he might be. However, his offenses carry their own punishment, and I have nothing to say against him." "I'm sure he's very rich, Fred," hinted Scrooge's niece. "At least, you always tell me so." "What of it, my dear?" said Scrooge's nephew. "His wealth is of no use to him. He doesn't do any good with it. He doesn't make himself comfortable with it. He hasn't the satisfaction of thinking that he is ever going to benefit us with it." "I have no patience with him," observed Scrooge's niece. Scrooge's niece's sisters and all the other ladies expressed the same opinion. "Oh, I have," said Scrooge's nephew. "I am sorry for him. I couldn't be angry with him if I tried. Who suffers from his ill whims? He himself always. He takes it into his head to dislike us, and he won't come to dine with us. What's the consequence? He doesn't lose much of a dinner. Indeed, I think he loses a very good dinner, interrupted Scrooge's niece. Everybody else said the same, and they must be allowed to have been competent judges because they had just had dinner with the dessert upon the table, were clustered around the fire by lamplight. Well, I am very glad to hear it, said Scrooge's nephew, because I haven't a good faith in these young housekeepers. What do you say, Topper? Topper had clearly got his eye on one of Scrooge's niece's sisters, for he answered that a bachelor was a wretched outcast who had no right to express an opinion on the subject. Whereas Scrooge's niece's sister blushed. Do go on, Fred, said Scrooge's niece, clapping her hands. He never finishes what he's going to say. He's such a ridiculous fellow. Scrooge's nephew reveled in another laugh, as it was impossible to keep the infection off. Though Scrooge's niece's sister tried hard to do so with aromatic vigor, his example was followed. I was only going to say, said Scrooge's nephew, that his consequences of taking a dislike to us and not making merry with us, as I think, that he loses some pleasant moments, which could do him no harm. I'm sure he loses pleasanter companions that he can find in his own thoughts, either in his moldy old office or his dusty chambers. I mean to give him the same chance every year, whether he likes it or not, for I pity him. He may rail at Christmas until he dies, but I can't help thinking better of him. I defy him. If he finds me going there in good temper, year after year, saying, Uncle Scrooge, how are you? If it only gets him in the vein to leave his poor clerk 50 pounds, that's something. And I think I really shook him yesterday. It was their turn to laugh now at the notion of his shaking Scrooge. But being thoroughly good-natured and not caring much, caring what they laughed at, so they laughed at any rate. He encouraged them in their merriment and passed the bottle joyously. After tea, they had some music, for they were a musical family and knew what they were about. When they sung a glee or catch, I assure you, especially Topper, who could growl away in the bass like a good one, and never swell the large vein in his forehead, or get red in the face over it. Scrooge's niece played well upon the harp, and played along other tunes a little simple in air, a mere nothing, you might learn to whistle in 2 minutes, which had been familiar to the child who fetched Scrooge from the boarding school, as he had been reminded by the ghost of Christmas past. When the strain of music sounded, all the things that the ghost had shown him came upon his mind. He softened more and more, and though thought that he could have listened to it often, years ago, he might have cultivated a kindness of life on his own happiness or his own hands. But they didn't devote the whole evening to music. After they played at forfeits, for it is good to be children sometimes, and never better than at Christmas, when its founder was a child himself. Stop. There was first a game of blind man's bluff, where of course there was. Hold on. Oh, Scrooge's niece was not one of the blind man's bluff party, but was made comfortable with a large chair and a footstool in a snug corner, where the ghost and Scrooge was behind her. But after she joined in forfeits and loved her lord to admiration with all the other letters of the alphabet. Likewise, the game of how, when, and where, she was great, and to the secret joy of Scrooge's nephew, beat her sisters hollow, though they were sharp girls too, as Topper could have told you. There might have been 20 people there, young and old, but they all played, and so did Scrooge, who wholly forgot in the interest that he had in what was going on, that his voice made no sound in their ears, but sometimes came out with the guesses quite loud, and often guessed quite right too. The ghost was greatly pleased to find him in this mood, and looked upon him in such favor that he begged like a boy to be allowed to stay until the guest departed. But the spirit said could not be done. "Here's a new game," said Spirit. "Only half hour, Spirit, only one." It was a game called Yes and No, where Scrooge's nephew had to think of something, and the rest must find out what. He only answered their questions yes or no, as was the case. The brisk fire of questioning to which was exposed excited from him that he was thinking of an animal, a live animal, rather disagreeable animal, a savage animal, an animal that growled and grunted and sometimes and talked sometimes, and lived in London and walked about the streets, and wasn't made of show or and wasn't led by anybody, and didn't live in a menagerie, and was never killed in the market, and was not a horse, or a donkey, or a cow, or a bull, or a tiger, or a dog, or a pig, or a cat, or a bear. At every fresh question there was put to him, this nephew burst into a fresh roar of laughter, and was so inexpressibly tickled that he was obliged to get up off the soda and stamp. At last, one of the sisters, falling into a similar state, cried out, I have found it out. I know what it is, Fred. I know what it is." "What is it?" cried Fred. "It's your Uncle Scrooge." It certainly was. Admiration was the universal sentiment, and though some objected that the reply to "Is it a bear?" ought to have been yes, inasmuch as an answer in the nephew was sufficient to have diverted their thoughts from Mr. Scrooge, supposing that there had ever been tendency that way. "He has given us plenty of merriment, I am sure," said Fred, and it would be ungrateful to not drink to his health. Here's a glass of mulled wine ready for our hand at the moment, and I say, Uncle Scrooge." "Well, Uncle Scrooge," they all cried. "A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to the old man wherever he is," said Scrooge's nephew. "He won't take it from me, but may he have it nevertheless. Uncle Scrooge." Uncle Scrooge had become so gay and light of heart that he would have pledged the unconscious company in return, and thanked them in an inaudible speech if the ghost had given him time. But the whole scene passed off in the breath of the last words spoken by the nephew, and he and the spirit were again upon their travels. Much they saw and far they went, and many homes they visited, but always with a happy end. The spirits stood beside sick beds, and they were cheerful. On foreign lands, and they were close to home. By struggling men, and they were patient in their great hope. By poverty, and it was rich. In atmosphere, hospital, and jail. In misery's every refuge, where vain man and his little brief authority had not made fast the door and barred the spirit out, he left his blessing, and taught Scrooge his precipice. It was a long night, if only a night, but Scrooge had his doubts of this, because the Christmas holidays appeared to be condensed into the space of time they passed together. It was strange, too, that while Scrooge remained unaltered in his outward form, the ghost grew older, clearly older. Scrooge observed this change, but not spoke of it, until they left a children's Twelfth Night party, when it looked upon the spirit as they stood together in an open place. He noticed that his hair was gray. "Are spirits' lives so short?" asked Scrooge. "My life upon this globe is very brief," replied the ghost. "It ends tonight." "Tonight?" cried Scrooge. "Tonight at midnight. Hark! The time grows near." The chimes were ringing the 11:15 at the moment. "Forgive me if I'm not justified in what I said Scrooge, looking intently at the spirit's robe. "But I see it again. Is it a foot? Not a claw." "It might be a claw, for the flesh there is upon it," was the spirit's sorrowful reply. "Look here." From the folding of its robe, it brought 2 children, wretched, abject, frightful, hideous, miserable. They kneeled down at its feet and clung upon the outside of its garment. "Oh, man, look here. Look. Look down here," exclaimed the ghost. There were a boy and a girl, yellow, meager, ragged, scowling, wolfish, but prostrate too in their humility. Graceful youth should have filled their features out and touched them with the freshest tints. A stale and shriveled hand like that of age had pinched and twisted them and pulled them into shreds. Where angels might have sat enthroned, devils lurked and glared out menacingly. No change, no degradation, no provision of humanity in any grade. Through all the mysteries of the wonderful creation, has monstrous, half so horrible and dreaded. Scrooge started back, appalled. Having them shown to him in this way, he tried to say they were fine children, but the words choked themselves, rather than be parties to lie of such enormous magnitude. "Spirit, are they yours?" Scrooge could say no more. "They are man's," said the spirit, looking down upon them, "and they cling to me, appealing from their fathers. The boy is ignorance, the girl is want. Beware them both in all of their degree. But most of all, beware of the boy, for on his brow I see that written which is doom. Unless the writing be erased, deny it," cried the spirit, stretching out its hand towards the city. "Slander those who tell it ye. Admit it for your factitious purposes, and make it worse, and bid the end. Have they no refuge or resource?" cried Scrooge. "Are there no prisons?" said the spirit, turning on him for the last time with his own words. "Are there no workhouses?" The bell struck 12. Scrooge looked about him for the ghost, and saw it not. As the last stroke ceased to vibrate, he remembered the predicament of old Jacob Marley, and lifting his eyes, beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground towards him. We will now take our final intermission before Stave 4 and 5. Once again, I encourage you during this time, please share the feed to social media so that more people can enjoy the reading, but also may be encouraged to send a donation and support Rare Breed Youth Outreach here in Springfield. I'll be right back in a few minutes. All right. Tea is here. See? That is piping hot. Water's done. And if everything goes according to plan, we will go ahead and just finish off the last two staves since they go by kind of quickly, which is good because the stave 4 is my least favorite one. It's just, I don't know, it's just long, kind of boring. So, but it must be done. Again, excuse me. Please, if you've not done already, click the link in the bio or in the video description to donate to Rare Breed Youth Outreach here in Springfield, help homeless teens and teens in other situations get the help and things that they need. Not only for during the season, but throughout the whole year. Yeah, please make a donation to them in the spirit of A Christmas Carol. So, all right. Oh, also want to give a shout out to my boys. They're having a game night. They have watched faithfully all 8 years. So thankful for them. Thankful for all the other people. I do know that there are several people who have tuned in at least a little bit all 8 years. So I thank you for coming back every year for a little bit at least just to check in and see how things are going. So yeah, thank you for everyone that chooses to participate in this. Love this story. Glad it's still around and it's many versions of it. But yeah, I'm just stalling now because I really don't want to read this part, but it must be done. Stave 4, The Last of the Spirits. The phantom slowly, gravely, silently approached. When it came near him, Scrooge bent down upon his knee, for the very thin air through which the spirit moved, it seemed to scatter gloom and misery. It was shrouded in a deep black garment, which concealed its head and face, its form, and left nothing of the visible, save one outstretched hand. But for this, it would have been difficult to detect its figure from the might and separate it from the darkness by which it was surrounded. He felt that it was tall and stately when it came beside him, and that its mysterious presence filled him with a solemn dread. He knew no more, for the spirit spoke nor moved. "I am in the ghost of Christmas yet to come," said Scrooge. The spirit answered not, but pointed outward with his hand. "You are about to show me the shadows of the things that have not happened, but will happen in the time before us," Scrooge pursued. "Is that so, spirit?" The upper portion of the garment was contracted for an instant in the folds, as if the spirit had inclined its head. This is the only answer he received. Although well used to ghostly company by this time, Scrooge feared the silent shape so much that his leg trembled beneath him, and he found that he could hardly stand when he prepared to follow it. The spirit paused for a moment, as observing his condition and giving him time to recover. But Scrooge was all the worse for it. It thrilled him with vague, uncertain horror to know that behind this dusky shroud there were ghostly eyes intently fixed on him, while he, though he stretched his own to the utmost, could see nothing but a spectral hand and one great heap of black. "Ghost of the future," he exclaimed, "I fear you more than any specter I have seen, but as I know your purpose is to do me good, and as I hope to live to be another man from what I was, I am prepared to bear your company and do so with a thankful heart. Will you not speak to me?" It gave no reply. The hand was pointed straight before him. "Lead on," said Spirit. "Lead on. The night is waning fast, and it is precious time to me, I know. Lead on." The phantom moved away as it had come towards him. Scrooge followed in the shadowy dress which bore him up, he thought, and carried him along. They scarcely seemed to enter the city, but the city rather seemed to spring up around them and encompass them of his own act. But there they were, in the heart about them, and encompassed them with his own act, of its own act. But there they were, in the heart of it, on change amongst the merchants, who hurried up and down and clinked their money in their pockets, and conversed in groups and looked at their watches and trifled thoroughly with the great gold seals and so forth, as Scrooge had seen them often. Scrooge stopped beside one little knot of businessmen, observing that the hand pointed them. Scrooge advanced to listen to their talk. "No," said a great fat man with a monstrous chin. "I don't know much about it. Either way, all I know is that he's dead." "When did he die?" inquired another one. "Last night, I believe." "Why, what was the matter with him?" asked a third, taking a vast quantity of snuff out of a very large snuff box. "I thought he'd never die." "God knows," said the first with a yawn. "What has he done with his money?" asked a red-faced gentleman with a pedulous escrivance on the end of his nose that shook like the gills of a turkey. "I haven't heard," said the man with the large chin, yawning again. "Left it to his company, perhaps. He hasn't left it to me, that's all I know." This pleasantry was received with a general laugh. "It's very likely to be a very cheap funeral," said the speaker, "for upon my life I don't know of anyone to go to it. Suppose we make up a party and volunteer?" "I don't mind going, if a lunch is provided. But I must be fed if I make one." Another laugh. "Well, I am the most disinterested among all of you," said the first, "for I never wear black gloves, and I never eat lunch. But I'll offer to go if anyone else will. When I come to think of it, I'm not at all sure that I wasn't his most peculiar friend, for we used to stop and speak whenever we met. Bye-bye." The speakers and listeners strolled away and mixed with other groups. Scrooge looked towards the spirit for explanation. He knew the men, and saw nothing very strange in this. The phantom glided on the street. Its finger pointed to two persons meeting. Scrooge listened again, thinking that the explanation might lie here. He knew these men, also, perfectly. They were men of business, very wealthy and of great importance. He had always made a point of always standing well in their esteem, in a business point of view, that is strictly in a business point of view. "How are you?" said one. "How are you?" returned the other. "Well," said the first, "old Scratch has got his own at last, eh?" "So I'm told," returned the second. "Cold, isn't it? Seasonably for Christmas time. You're not any skanter, I suppose?" No. Something else to think of. Good morning." Not another word. That was their meeting, their conversation, and their parting. Scrooge was at first inclined to be surprised that the spirit should attach importance to conversations apparently so trivial. But feeling assured that they would must have some hidden purpose, he set himself to consider that it was likely to be. He could scarcely be supposed to have any bearing on the death of Jacob, his old partner, for that was a past, and this ghost province was the future. Nor could he think of any one immediately connecting himself to whom he could apply them, but nothing doubting that to whosoever they applied could have some latent moral for his own improvement. He resolved to treasure every word he heard and everything he saw, and especially to observe the shadows of himself when it appeared. For he had an expectation that the conduct of his future self would give him the clue he missed and would rather render the solution of these riddles easy. He looked about in that very place for his own image. But another man stood in his accustomed corner, and though the clock pointed to his usual time of day for being there, He saw no likeness of himself among the multitudes that poured in through the porch. It gave him little surprise, however, for he had been revolving in his mind a change of life, and though he had hoped to see his newborn resolutions carried about in his carried out in this. Quiet and dark beside himself stood the phantom with an outstretched hand. When he roused himself from his unusual quest, he fancied from the turn of his hand and its situation in reference to himself that the unseeing eyes were looking at him keenly. It made him shudder and feel very cold. They left the busy scene and went into an obscure part of town where Scrooge had never penetrated before, although he recognized its situation and its bad repute. The ways were foul and narrow, the shops and houses wretched, the people half-naked, drunk, slip-shopped, ugly, alleyways and archways like so many cesspools degorged their offenses of smell and dirt and life upon the staggering street. The whole quarter reeked with crime, with filth and misery. Far in this den of infamous retort was a low, borrowed, beating shop below a penthouse roof, where iron, old rags, bottles, bones, and greasy offal were brought. Upon the floor within were piled up heaps of rusty keys, nails, chains, files, hinges, scales, weights, and refused iron of all kinds. Secrets that would like to scrutinize were bred and held in mountains of unseen rags, masses of corrupted fat, and sepulchres of bones. Sitting in among the wares he dealt in, by a charcoal stove made of old bricks, was a gray-haired rascal, nearly 70 years of age, who had screened himself from the cold air without by a frosty curtain of miscellaneous tatters, hung up in a line, and smoked his pipe in all the luxury of calm retirement. Scrooge and the Phantom came into the presence of this man, just as a woman with a heavy bundle slunk into the shop. But she had scarcely entered when another woman, similarly laden, came in too, and she was closely followed by a man in faded black, who was no less startled by the sight of them than they had been upon the recognition of each other. After a short period of blank astonishment, in which the old man with the pipe had joined them, they all three burst into laughter. "Let the charwoman alone be the first," cried she who entered first. "Let the laundress alone be the second, and let the undertaker's man alone be the third. Look here, old Joe, here's a chance. If we weren't all three met here without meaning it." "You couldn't have met in a better place," said old Joe, removing his pipe from his mouth. "Come into the parlor. You were made free of it long ago, you know, and the others two ain't strangers. Stop till I shut the door of the shop. Ah, how she shrieks. There ain't such a rusty piece of metal in the place as its own hinges, I believe, and I'm sure there's no such old bones here as mine. We're all suitable to our calling, and we're all matched. Come into the parlor. Come into the parlor." The parlor was the space behind the screen of rags. The old man raked the fire together with an old stir rod, and having trimmed his smoky lamp, for it was night, with the stem of his pipe, put it into his mouth again. When he did this, the woman who had already spoken threw a bundle on the floor and sat down in a flaunting manner on a stool, crossing her elbows on her knees, and looked with bold defiance at the other two. "What odds, then? What odds, Miss Dilbert?" said the woman. "Every person has a right to take care of themselves. He always did." "That's true indeed," said the laundress. "No man more so." "Why, then, don't stand staring as if you was afraid, woman. Who's the wiser? We're not going to pick holes in each other's coats, I suppose." "No, indeed," says Miss Dilbert and the man together. "We should hope not." "Very well, then," cried the woman. "That's enough. Who's worse for wear than the loss of a few things like these? Not a dead man, I suppose. No, indeed, said Miss Dilbert, laughing. If he wasn't to keep 'em after he was dead, a wicked old screw, pursued the woman, why, wasn't he natural in his lifetime? If he hadn't been, he had have somebody to look after when he had been struck with death, instead of lying grasping out his last there, alone by himself. It's the truest word ever spoken, said Miss Dilbert. It's judgment on him. I wish it was a little heavier one, replied, and it should have been. You may depend on it. If I could have laid my hands on anything else, open that bundle, old Joe, and let me see the value of it. Speak plain, I'm not afraid to be first, nor afraid for them to see it. We know pretty well that we were helping ourselves before we met here. I believe it's no sin. Open the bundle, Joe. But the gallantry of her friends would not allow this, and the man in the faded black, mounting the breech first, produced his plunder. It was not extensive. A seal or two, a pencil case, a pair of button sleeves, and a brooch of no great value were all. They were severely exclaimed and appraised by old Joe, who chalked up the sums he was deposed to give for each on the wall, and added them into a total where he found there was nothing more to come. That's your account, said Joe, and I wouldn't give another sixpence if I was to be boiled for doing so. Who's next? Miss Dilbert was next. Sheets and towels, a little wearing apparel, 2 old-fashioned silver spoons, a pair of sugar tongs, and a few boots. Her account was stated on the wall in the same manner. I always give too much to ladies. It's a weakness of mine, and that's the way I ruin myself, said old Joe. That's your account, and if you ask me for another penny and make it an open question, I'll repent of being so liberal and knock off half a crown. Now undo my bundle, Joe, said the first woman. Joe went down on his knees for a greater convenience of opening it, and having unfastened the great many knots, dragged out a large and heavy roll of some dark stuff. What do you call this? Said Joe. Bed curtains? Ah, returned the woman, laughing and leaning with both her crossed arms. Bed curtains. You don't mean to say you took 'em down, rings and all, with him lying there, said Joe. Yes, I do, replied the woman. Why not? You were born to make a fortune, said Joe, and you'll certainly do so. I certainly shan't hold my hand when I can't get anything in by reaching it out. For the sake of such a man as he was, I promise you, Joe, returned the woman. Don't drop that oil. Upon the blankets. His blankets? Asked Joe. Who else do you think they are? Replied the woman. He isn't likely to catch a cold without them, I dare say. I hope he didn't die of anything catching, eh? Said old Joe, stopping his work and looking up. Don't you be afraid of that, returned the woman. I ain't so fond of his company that I'd loiter about him for such things. Even if he did, you may look through that shirt till your eyes ache, but you won't find a hole in it, nor a threadbare place. It's the best he had, and it's a fine one. They would have wasted it if it wasn't for me. What do you call wasting it? Asked Joe. Putting it on him to be buried in, to be sure, replied the woman with a laugh. Somebody was fool enough to do it, but I took it off again. If calico ain't good enough for such a purpose, it ain't good enough for anything. It's quite as becoming to the body. He can't look uglier than he did in this one. Scrooge listened to the dialogue in horror as they sat grouped about their spoil in the scanty light afforded by the old man's lamp. He viewed them with a disdain and disgust which he could hardly have been greater, though they had been obscene demons marketing the corpse itself. The same woman laughed when Joe, producing an old flannel bag with money in it, told out their several gains upon the ground. This is the end of it, you see. He frightened every one away from him when he was alive, to profit us when he was dead. Spirit, said Scrooge, shuddering from head to foot. I see. The case of this unhappy man might be my own. My life tends that way now. Merciful heavens, what is this? He recoiled in terror, for the scene had changed, and now he almost touched a bed, a bare, uncurtained bed. on which, beneath a ragged sheet, there lay something covered up, which, though it was dumb, announced itself in awful language. The room was very dark, too dark to be observed with any accuracy, though Scrooge glanced round in obedience to a secret impulse, anxious to know what kind of room it was. A pale light, rising in the outer air, fell straight upon the bed, and on it, plundered and bereft, unwatched, unwept, uncared for, was the body of this man. Scrooge glanced towards the phantom. Its steady hand pointed out to the head. The cover was so carelessly adjusted that the slightest raising of it, the motion of a finger upon Scrooge's part, would have revealed the face. He thought of it, felt how easy it would be to do, and longed to do it, but had no more power to withdraw the veil than to dismiss the specter by his side. Oh, cold, cold, dreadful death. Set up thy altar here, and dressed it with such terrors that thou hast thy command. From this is thy dominion. But of thy loved, revered, and honored head thou canst not turn one hair to thy dread purpose, and make one feature odious. Is it not that the hand is heavy and will fall down when released? Is it not that the heart and pulse are still, but that the hand was open, generous and true, the heart brave, warm and tender, and the pulse a man's? Strike, shadow, strike, and see his good deeds springing from the wound, to sow the world with life immortal. No voice pronounced these words to Scrooge's ear, and yet he heard them. When he looked upon the bed, he thought, if this man could rise up now, what would be his foremost thought? Avarice, hard dealings, griping cares, they had brought him to this rich inn truly. He lay in the dark, empty house, with not a man, woman, or child to say he was kind to me in this or that, or for the memory of one kind word. It would be kind to him. A cat was tearing at the door, and there was a sound of gnawing rats beneath the hearthstone. What they wanted in the room of death, and why they were so restless and disturbed, Scrooge did not dare to think. Spirit, this is a frightful place, and leaving it, I shall not leave its lesson. Trust me, let us go. Still, the ghost pointed with an unmoving finger to the head. I understand you, Scrooge returned, and I would do it if I could, but I have not the power, Spirit. I have not the power. Again, it seemed to look upon him. If there is any man in this town who feels emotion caused by this man's death, said Scrooge, agonized, show this person to me, Spirit, I beseech you. The phantom spread its dark robe before him for a moment like a wing, and withdrawing it, revealed a dark room by daylight where a mother and child were. She was expecting someone, and with anxious eagerness she walked up and down the room, startled at every sound, looked out the window and glanced at the clock, tried, but in vain, to work with her needle, and could hardly bear the voices of the children in their play. At length, the long, unexpected knock was heard. She hurried to the door and met her husband, a man whose face was careworn and depressed. Though he was young, there was a remarkable expression in it now, a kind of serious delight of which he felt ashamed, and which he struggled to repress. He sat down to the dinner they had been hoarding for him by the fire, and when she asked him fairly what news, which was not until after a long silence appeared embarrassed how to answer. Is it good, she said, or bad? To help him. Bad, he answered. We are quite ruined. No, there's still hope yet, Caroline. If he relents, she said, amazed. There is. Nothing is past hope if such a miracle has happened. He is past relenting, said her husband. He is dead. She was a mild and patient creature. her face spoke truth, but she was thankful in her soul to hear it, and she said so with clasped hands. She prayed forgiveness the next moment and was sorry, but the first was the emotion of her heart. What a half-drunken woman, whom I told you of last night said to me when I tried to see him and obtain a week's delay, and what I thought was a mere excuse to avoid me turns out to be quite true. He was not only very ill, but dying then. To whom will our debt be transferred? I don't know. But before the time we shall be ready with the money, and even though we were not, it would be a bad fortune indeed to find so merciless a creditor in his successor. May we sleep tonight with light hearts, Caroline. Yes, soften as they would, their hearts were lighter. The children's faces hushed and clustered round to hear what they so little understood, were brighter, and it was a happier house for the man's death. The only emotion that the ghost could show him, caused by this event, was one of pleasure. Let me see some tenderness connected with a death, said Scrooge, or that dark chamber spirit which we left just now will be forever present to me. The ghost conducted him through several streets familiar to his feet, and as they went along, Scrooge looked here and there to find himself, but nowhere was he to be seen. They entered poor Bob Cratchit's house, the dwelling he had visited before, and found the mother and children seated round the fire. Quiet, very quiet. The noisy little Cratchits were as still as statues in one corner, and sat looking up at Peter, who had a book before him. The mother and daughters were engaged in sewing, but surely they were very quiet. And he took his child, and set him in the midst of them. Where had Scrooge heard these words before? He had not dreamed them. The boy must have read them out loud as he and the spirits crossed the threshold. Why did he not go on? The mother laid her work on the table and put her hands to her face. The color hurts my eyes, she said. The color? Ah, poor Tiny Tim. They're better now again, said Cratchit's wife. It makes them weak by candlelight, and I wouldn't show weak eyes to your father when he comes home from the world. It must be near his time. Past it, rather, Peter answered, shutting his book. But I think he walks a little slower than he used to these few last evenings, Mother. They were very quiet again. At last, she said, and in a steady, cheerful voice, the only one faltered. I have known him walk with Tiny Tim upon his shoulder, very fast indeed. So have I, cried Peter, often. So have I, exclaimed another. So at all. But he was very light to carry, she resumed, intent on her work, and his father loved him so, that it was no trouble. And there is your father at the door. She hurried out to meet him, and little Bob and his comforter. He had no need of it, poor fellow, came in. His tea was ready for him on the hob, and they all tried who should help him the most. The two young Cratchits got up on his knees and laid each child a little cheek against his face, as they said, Don't mind, father, don't be grieved. Bob was very cheerful with them, and spoke pleasantly to all the family. He looked at the work upon the table, and praised the industry and the speed of Miss Cratchit and the girls. They would be done long before Sunday, said. Sunday? You went today then, Robert? said his wife. Yes, my dear. I wish you could have gone. It would have done you good to see how green a place it was. But you'll see it often. I promised him that I would walk there on Sunday. My little child, cried Bob, my poor little child. He broke down at once. He couldn't help it. If he could have helped it, he and his child would have been farther apart, perhaps, than they were. He left the room and went into a room above, which was lighted, cheerful, and hung with Christmas. There was a chair set close beside the child, and there were signs of someone having been there lately. Poor Bob sat down in it, and when he had thought a little and composed himself, he kissed the little face. He was reconciled to what had happened, and went down quite happy. They drew about the fire and talked, and the girls and mothers working still, Bob told them of the extraordinary kindness of Mr. Scrooge's nephew, whom he had scarcely seen but once, and who, upon meeting him in the street that day, and seeing that he had looked just a little down, said Bob, inquired what had happened to distress him. On which, said Bob, for he is the pleasantest spoken gentleman I've ever heard. I told him. I'm heartily sorry for it, Mr. Cratchit, he said, and I'm heartily sorry for your good wife. By the by, how he ever knew that, I don't know. Knew what, my dear? Why, that you're a good wife, replied Bob. Everyone knows that, said Peter. Very well observed, my boy, cried Bob. I hope they do. Heartily sorry, he said, for your good wife. If I can be of any service to you in any way, he said, giving me his card, there's where I live. Pray come to me. Now it wasn't, cried Bob, for the sake of anything he might be able to do for us so much as for any kind way, for this was quite delightful. It really seemed as if he had known our Tiny Tim and felt with us. I'm sure he's a good soul, said Miss Cratchit. You would be sure of it, my dear, if you saw and spoke to him. I shouldn't be at all surprised, mark, when I say, if he got Peter a better situation. Only hear that, Peter, said Miss Cratchit, and then, cried one of the girls, Peter will be keeping company with someone and set up for himself. Get along with you, retorted Peter, grinning. It's just as likely as not, said Bob. One of these days there's plenty of time for that, my dear, but however and whenever we part from one another, I am sure we shall none of us forget poor Tiny Tim, shall we? Or this first parting that there was among us. Never, father, they all cried. And I know, said Bob, I know, my dears, that when we recollect how patient and how mild he was, although he was a little child, we shall not quarrel easily among ourselves, and forget poor Tiny Tim in doing it. No, never, father, they all cried. I am very happy, said little Bob. I am very happy. Mrs. Cratchit kissed him, and his daughters kissed him, and the two young Cratchits kissed him, and Peter and himself shook hands. Spirit of Tiny Tim, thou childish essence was from God. Spectre, said Scrooge, something informs me that our parting moment is at hand. I know it, but I know not how. Tell me what man this was that we saw, that was whom we saw lying dead. The ghost of Christmas yet to come conveyed him. As before, though at a different time, he thought indeed there was no order in these later visions, save that they were from the future, into the resorts of businessmen, but showed him not himself, indeed. The spirit did not say for anything, but went straight on as to the end of just now desired, until besought by Scrooge to tarry for a moment. This court, said Scrooge, through which we may hurry, is where my place of occupation is, and has been for a length of time. See the house. Let me behold what I shall be in the days to come. The spirit stopped. The hand was pointed elsewhere. The house yonder, exclaimed Scrooge. Why do you point that way? Then inexorable finger underwent no change. Scrooge hastened to the window of his office and looked in. It was an office still, but not his. The furniture was not the same, and the figure in the chair was not himself. The phantom pointed as before. He joined it at once, and wondering why and whither he had gone, accompanied it until they reached an iron gate. He paused to look around before entering. A churchyard. Here, then, they reached a wretched man whose name he had now to learn lay underneath the ground. It was a worthy place, walled in by houses, overrun by grass and weeds, the growth of vegetation's death, not life, choked up with too much burying, fat with rapine appetite, a worthy place indeed. The spirit stood among the graves and pointed down to one. He advanced towards it trembling. The phantom was exactly as it had been, but he dreaded that he now saw meaning in its solemn shape. "Before I draw nearer to the stone to which you point," said Scrooge, "answer me one question. Are these the shadows of things that will be, or are they the shadows of things to come, that may be only?" Still the ghost pointed downward, to the grave, by which it stood. "Men's courses will foreshadow certain ends to which, if preserved in, they must lead," said Scrooge. "But if the courses be departed from, the ends will change. Say it is thus, with what you show me." The spirit was immovable as ever. Scrooge kept towards it, trembling as he went, and followed the finger, read upon the stone of the neglected grave his own name, Ebenezer Scrooge. "I am I the man who laid upon the bed?" he cried upon his knees. The finger pointed from the grave to him and back again. "No, spirit. Oh, no, no." The finger still was there. "Spirit," he cried, tight clutching on his robe, "hear me. I am not the man I was. I will not be the man I must have been. But for this intercourse, why show me this if I'm beyond hope?" For the first time, the hand appeared to shake. "Good spirit," he pursued, as down on the knee before him, "your nature intercedes for me and pities me. Assure me that I may change these shadows, and you have shown me by an altered life." The kind hand trembled. "I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, the present, the future. The spirit of all three things strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons that they teach. Oh, tell me I may sponge away the writing on that stone." In his agony, he caught the spectral hand. It sought to free itself, but it was strong in its entry, and detained it. The spirit, stronger yet, repulsed him. Holding up his hand in one last prayer to have his fate reversed, he saw an alteration in the phantom's hood and dress. It shrunk and collapsed and dwindled down into a bedpost. Stave 5. The End of It. Yes, and the bedpost was his own, and the bed was his own, and the room was his own. Best and happiest of all, the time before him was his own, to make amends in. "I will live in the past, the present, and the future," Scrooge repeated, as he scrambled out of bed. "The spirits of all three shall strive within me. O Jacob Marley, heaven and Christmas time be praised for this. I say it on my knees, old Jacob, on my knees." He was so fluttered and so glowing with his good intentions that his broken voice could scarcely answer to his call. He had been sobbing violently in his conflict with the spirit, and his face was wet with tears. They are not torn down," said Scrooge, folding one of his bed curtains in his arms. "They are not torn down, rings and all. They are here, and I'm here. The shadows of the things that have been may be dispelled. This they will be. I know they will be." His hand was busy with the garments all the time, turning them inside out, putting them upside down, tearing them, losing them, playing ball with them, making them parties to every kind of extravagance. "I don't know what to do," cried Scrooge, laughing and crying in the same breath. "I'm as light as a feather. I'm as happy as an angel. I'm as merry as a schoolboy. I'm as giddy as a drunken man. Hello, well, a Merry Christmas to everybody, a Happy New Year to all the world." He had frisked into the sitting room and was now standing on one leg, perfectly winded. "There's the saucepan that the gruel was in," cried Scrooge, staring off again and frisking around the fireplace. "There's the door by which the ghost of Jacob Marley entered. There's the corner from which the ghost of Christmas present sat. There's the window where I saw the wandering spirits. It's all right. It's all fine. It all happened." Really, for a man who had been out of practice for so many years, it was a splendid laugh. It was an illustrious laugh, the father of a long, long line of brilliant laughs. I don't know what day of the month it is, said Scrooge. I don't know how long I've been among the spirits. I don't know anything. I'm quite a baby. Never mind, I don't care. I'd rather be a baby. He was checked into his transports by the church, by the churches ringing out the lustiest pearls he had ever heard. Clash, clang, hammer, ding, dong, bell, ding, dong, dong, clash, clang. Oh, glorious, glorious. Running to the window, he opened it up and put out his head. No fog, no mist, clear, bright, jovial, stirring cold, cold, piping for the blood to dance to, golden sunlight, heavenly sky, sweet fresh air, merry bells, oh glorious, glorious. What's today? Cried Scrooge, calling down toward a boy in Sunday clothes, who perhaps had loitered in to look upon him. Huh? Returned the boy with all of his might of wonder. What's today, my fine fellow? Said Scrooge. Today? Replied the boy. Well, it's Christmas Day. It's Christmas Day, said Scrooge to himself. I haven't missed it. The spirits have done it all in one night. They can do whatever they like. Of course they can. Of course they can. Hello, my fine fellow. Hello, returned the boy. Do you know the poulterers in the street, but one at the corner? Scrooge inquired. I should hope I did, replied the lad. An intelligent boy, said Scrooge, a remarkable boy. Do you know whether they've sold the prize turkey that was hanging up there? Not the little prize turkey, the big one. The one as big as me, returned the boy. A delightful boy, said Scrooge. It's a pleasure to talk to him. Yes, my buck. It's hanging there now, replied the boy. Is it? Said Scrooge. Well, go and buy it. Ah, exclaimed the boy. No, said Scrooge. I'm in earnest. Go and buy it, and tell him to bring it here, that I may give them the directions of where to take it. Come back here with the man, and I'll give you a shilling. Come back with him in less than 5 minutes, and I'll give you half a crown. The boy was off like a shot. He must have had a steady hand at the trigger who could have got a shot off as half fast. I'll send it to Bob Cratchit's, whispered Scrooge, rubbing his hands and splitting with a laugh. He shan't know who sends it. It's twice the size of Tiny Tim. Joe Miller never would have made such a joke as sending it to Bob would be. The hand in which he wrote the address was not a steady one, but write it he did somehow, and went downstairs and opened the door, ready for the coming of the poulterman. As he stood there waiting for his arrival, the knocker caught his eye. I shall love it as long as I live, cried Scrooge, patting it with his hand. I scarcely ever look at it before. What an honest expression it has on its face. It's a wonderful knocker. Oh, here's the turkey. Hello, Merry Christmas. It was a turkey. He had never have stood on its legs, that bird. It would have snapped him short off in a minute, like sticks of sealing wax. Why, it's impossible to carry that to Camden Town, said Scrooge. You must have a cab. The chuckle with which he said this, and the chuckle with which he paid for the turkey, and the chuckle with which he paid for the cab, and the chuckle with which he recompensated the boy, were only to be exceeded by the chuckle with which he sat down breathless in his chair again and chuckled till he cried. Shaving was not an easy task, for his hand continued to shake very much, and shaving requires attention. Even though you don't dance while you're at it. But if he had cut the end of his nose off, he would have put a piece of sticking plaster over it and been quite satisfied. He dressed himself all in his best, and at last got into the streets. The people were by this time pouring forth, as he had seen with the ghost of Christmas present, and walking by with his hands behind him, Scrooge regarded everyone with a delighted smile. He looked so irresistibly pleasant in the word that 3 or 4 good-humored fellows said, "Good morning, sir, a Merry Christmas to you." And Scrooge said often afterwards that of the blithe sound he had ever heard, and those were the blithest in his ears. He had not gone far when, coming on towards him, he beheld the portly gentleman who had walked into his counting-house the day before and said, "Scrooge and Marley's, I believe." It sent a pang across his heart to think how this old gentleman would look upon him when they met. But he knew what path lay straight for him, and he took it. "My dear sir," said Scrooge, quickening his pace and taking the old gentleman by both his hands, How do you do? I hope you succeeded yesterday. It was very kind of you. Merry Christmas, sir. Mr. Scrooge? Yes, he said, that's my name, and I fear it may not be pleasant to you. Allow me to ask your pardon, and I will have the goodness to. Here Scrooge whispered in his ear. Lord bless me, cried the gentleman, as if his breath was gone. My dear Mr. Scrooge, are you serious? If you please, said Scrooge, and not a farthing less. A great many back payments are included in this, I assure you. Will you do me the favor? My dear sir, cried the other, shaking hands with him, I don't know what to say to such Don't say anything, please, retorted Scrooge. Come and see me. Will you come and see me? I will, cried the old gentleman, and it was clear he meant to do it. Thank you, said Scrooge. I am much obliged to you. I thank you 50 times. God bless you. He went to the church and walked about the streets and watched the people hurrying to and fro and patted children on the head and questioned beggars and looked down into the kitchens of houses and up to the windows and found that anything could yield him pleasure. He had never dreamed that anything could give him so much happiness, and that afternoon he turned his steps towards his nephew's house. He passed the door a dozen times before he had the courage to go up and knock. But he made a dash and did it. Is your master at home, my dear? Said Scrooge to the girl. Very nice girl. Yes, sir. Where is he, my love? Said Scrooge. He's in the dining room, sir, along with the mistress. Shall I show you upstairs, if you please? Thank you. He knows me, said Scrooge, with a hand already on the dining room lock. I'll go in here, my dear. He turned in gently and slid his face in round the door. They were looking at the table, which was spread out in a great array, for these young housekeepers are always nervous on such points and like to see that everything was right. Fred, said Scrooge. Dear heart alive, how his niece by marriage started. Scrooge had forgotten for the moment about her sitting in the corner with the footstool and hadn't have done it on any account. Well, bless my soul, cried Fred. Who's that? It's I, your Uncle Scrooge. I've come to dinner. Will you let me in, Fred? Let him in. It's a mercy he didn't shake his arm off. He was at home in 5 minutes, and nothing could be home in 5 minutes. Nothing could be heartier. His niece looked just the same. So did Topper when he came. So did the sisters when they came. So did everyone when they all came. Wonderful party, wonderful games, wonderful unanimity, wonderful happiness. But he was early at the office the next morning. Early the next morning. Oh, was he early there? If he could only be there first and catch Bob Cratchit coming in late. That was the thing he had set his heart upon. And he did it. Yes, he did. The struck 9. No Bob. A quarter past. No Bob. He was full 18 minutes and a half past his time. Scrooge sat with his door wide open that he might see him come into the tank. His hat was off before he opened the door, and his comforter too, and he sat on his stool in a jiffy, driving away with his pen as if he were trying to overtake 9 o'clock. Hello, growled Scrooge in his accustomed voice, as near as he could foreign it. What do you mean by coming here at this time of day? I'm very sorry, sir, said Bob. I am behind my dime. You are, repeated Scrooge. Yes, I think you are. Step this way, if you please. It's only once a year, sir, pleaded Bob, peering from the tank. It shall not be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday, sir. Now, I'll tell you what, my friend, said Scrooge. I'm not going to stand for this anything any longer. And therefore, he continued, leaping from his stool and giving Bob such a dig in the waistcoat and staggering him back into the tank, and therefore, I'm about to raise your salary. Bob trembled, got a little nearer to the ruler. He had a momentary idea of knocking Scrooge down with it, holding him, and calling to the people in the court for help and a straight waistcoat. "A Merry Christmas, Bob," said Scrooge with an eagerness that he could not mistaken, as he clapped him on the back. "A merrier Christmas, Bob, than I have ever given you for many a year. I'll raise your salary and endeavor to assist your struggling family, and we'll discuss your affairs this afternoon before this very fire over a Christmas bowl of smoking bishop, Bob. Make up the fires and buy another scuttle before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit." Scrooge was better than his word, and indefinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. He became a good friend, and as good a master, and as good a man as the good old city knew, or any other good old city, town, or borough in the good old world. Some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but he let them laugh and little heeded them, for he was wise enough to know that nothing ever happened on this globe for good at which some people did not have their fill of laughter in the outset, and knowing that such was these would be blind anyway. He thought it quite as well that they should wrinkle up their noses and grins as have the malady in less attractive forms. His own heart laughed, and that was quite enough for him. He had no further intercourse with the spirits, but lived upon the total abstinence principle ever afterwards, and it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well. And if any man alive possessed the knowledge, may that be truly said of us, and all of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, every one. I want to thank you for joining me for the 8th annual reading of A Christmas Carol. Again, if you have not yet, I encourage you to please donate to Rare Breed Youth Outreach here in Springfield. Information for them can be found in the video description below. Or if not Rare Breed, please find some organization to donate to this season, where want is so keenly felt, as said in the book. Little side note, actually, in the 8 years that I've read this, I've never said, but if you've ever watched the Muppets Christmas Carol, at the end where it talks about Tiny Tim not dying, there's Gonzo, I believe, puts a lot of emphasis on he did not die, because in the original story, Tiny Tim actually died. Like, that didn't change. And so Charles Dickens received such hate mail, I guess, that Tiny Tim died, that he went back and actually put it in the next version to come out, the next edition, with emphasis on "and Tiny Tim, who did not die," to appease everyone who had been upset that Tiny Tim did die at the end of the book. So he did originally die, but don't believe it'd be old Victorian England without some early death and whatnot. So anyway, I digress. Thank you again for joining me this evening. If you did donate, thank you. I appreciate it. Rare Breed, I'm sure appreciates it as well. And yes, have a Merry Christmas, holiday season, whatever you choose to celebrate. Have a Happy New Year. May next year be lighter than this year, and have plenty of good things in store for us. So yes, Merry Christmas, and I will see you next year. Good night.